Today the meeting will be split into two sessions. In the first session we're meeting with representatives from Mesh Ireland and Mesh Survivors Ireland, and the second session we're meeting with the HSE to discuss issues relating to vaginal mesh implants. The committee will also endeavour to examine issues relating to abdominal mesh on a separate occasion in the near future. I want to welcome from Mesh Ireland Ms Mary McLaughlin, Ms Amanda Jackson and Ms Margaret Bulger. Also welcome from Mesh Survivors Ireland, Ms Terry Martin, Ms Margaret Byrne and Ms Louise Keogh. All members and witnesses are again reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way to make him, her or it identifiable, or otherwise engage in a speech that might be seen as or regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or to the entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you would be directed to discontinue your remarks. It's imperative that you comply with any such direction. There's a pending litigation arising out of the use of mesh devices. Those cases have yet to come before the courts, which will decide the issues of fact and legal liability. In the light of the constitutional separation of powers and the respect that the Oireachtas must show for the courts, this hearing should not prejudice or attempt to second-guess or influence the outcome of that litigation. The witnesses and members should therefore avoid comments in which, in effect, prejudge the outcome of these such cases, such as allegations of negligence or legal liability. So can I begin by calling on Ms Mary McLaughlin to make your opening remarks. Mary, you're welcome.
Good morning, Chairman and members. Thank you for the invitation extended to Mesh Ireland to discuss the issues relating to vaginal mesh implants. Mesh Ireland is an all-Ireland group with 150 members. Two members join me today, Amanda Jackson and Margaret Bulger. The motto of our group is "For mesh injured, by mesh injured." We firmly believe that patient representatives must be the injured themselves, an approach not currently embraced by the HSE mesh pathways. The former Minister of Health did not meaningfully engage with the Mesh Ireland campaign. I have represented Mesh Ireland at the 2018 to 2020 UK Coverage Review and to governments in the North and in Scotland. I have communicated in previous correspondence to the Committee on my mesh advocacy activities regarding solutions to the non-availability of full and safe mesh removal surgeries in Ireland. Mesh injury is a global scandal, the legacy of more than 2 decades of implanting mesh. Statistics convey the incidence of implantation and mesh injury. The HSE has not supplied its data. In NHS England alone, approximately 100,000 women had mesh implanted in 2008 to 2017. A former Chief Medical Officer of England estimated the mesh injury rate at 15 to 20%. The Irish state has no figures. The two groups here represent 750 members. In recent years, Scotland and Quebec have introduced mesh removal costs reimbursement legislation, policies and funding for their injured. USA Justice Departments have reached multi-state settlements with mesh manufacturers for actions based on endangering patients through deceptive marketing. The respective sums are $188.6 million, $344 million and $60 million. In contrast, a different wind is blowing here in Ireland. In Ireland, mesh-injured patients are having to finance their own full and safe removal of mesh implants. The local mood remains anchored in talking up partial removals of the implants as the best alternative. It is not simply the case that the low-volume HSE data of attempted full removals evidence the risk to patient safety, where HSE surgeons may be coming under pressure to demonstrate skills to have a go at a full removal, whether they have the skill set and expertise or not. Yet mesh removal skills are a special skill set. It is a perfect storm scenario which should be resolved by stepping up access to the treatment abroad scheme, not restricting it. Why full mesh and safe removal is the best option? When polypropylene mesh implants are inserted, our internal tissues form scar tissue over the implant. It is the scar tissue which encases the implant and holds them in place. The incontinence tapes, or slings, are on average 22 centimetres long. The prolapse meshes are much larger than slings. They can run from the front of the pelvis to the rectal area, causing both urinary and bowel incontinence or retention when problems arise. I can best describe them as having the size of a lady's panty liner, with long strips going off at the sides. Some have 6 strips. Some are additionally secured internally by additional metal fasteners and staples. Their position in our bodies and the scar tissue surrounding them poses surgical challenges in removing them. Partial removals, the default solution for 2 decades, are not the answer. If a woman has pain from mesh in her groin, removing the easily accessible few centimetres of mesh from under the bladder pipe will not ease that pain. Eventually, surgeons have no access to the remainder implant due to the dense scar tissue. They simply cannot get in at the mesh. These women have only non-surgical treatment options open. Access and funding. The principles of autonomy and informed consent tell us that women have a right to have the option of full safe removals of their implant on the public healthcare system. Yet for the HSE healthcare patients, the treatment abroad scheme is illusory. It is a catch-22. The patients must exhaust the treatment abroad scheme pathway to prove they have tried the available routes. But the system is stacked against them. First, the HSE's official position is that these surgeries are available in Ireland. We dispute this. This unequivocal and bold statement is a hurdle for which our women alone cannot dismantle. Secondly, HSE surgical community is deeply attached to partial removals. It is their historical comfort zone. In our view, patients who reject the HSE surgical preferences will only receive minimalistic lip service support when they asked HSE consultants to provide necessary documentation to support their application to the public healthcare treatment abroad scheme. 2 women did travel to the USA with HSE consultant authored letters of support. However, what differentiates these 2 cases from others is that these patients funded their surgeries through private healthcare and their own financial means. It is here that a 2-tier system emerges. Private patients are passported through. HSE-reliant patients are kettled in local HSE pathways. Patient choice should not be determined by a medical community, which dilutes its support for the identical medical procedure with the identical surgeon based on the financial means of the patients. HSE patients are currently experiencing a mindset akin to like it or lump it, partial removals or nothing. They deserve to be treated with respect. The procedural mechanisms provide a slam dunk for rejecting applications related to full removal surgeries abroad. Weakly worded letters stating patient feels that she would benefit from this surgery contrast starkly with letters supplied to private patients which embrace their choice of a more experienced surgeon abroad. Notwithstanding the letter, the HSE's official position is that there is not just one, but many surgeons who perform this operation locally. That means that the treatment abroad scheme's pathway is a fool's errand. The gateway door was never really open. The HSE conducts an automated appeal. Rejection follows. The door is bolted from the inside. In summary, our women deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, concepts which underpin a fair and equal society. We have that the state has a gap in its services. Currently, it is a David and Goliath battle, a war of attrition. Our women deserve access to full and safe removal operations performed by a surgeon of their choice. It is in the hands of a right surgeon. This is an established surgical procedure which only lasts for a few hours. It is affordable to the state, and this pathway is the choice of many. This concludes my opening statement. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Mary. Margaret Bourne is going to take this.
Speak on behalf of Terry Martin. Thank you to the committee for inviting members of Mesh Survivors Ireland here to speak today. And thank you to Amanda and Terry, who's not here. So this is the opening statement by Terry Martin, advocate for Mesh Survivors Ireland of Mesh injured patients. Firstly, I would like to thank the Joint Committee for inviting Margaret, Louise and myself as representatives from Mesh Survivors Ireland Group, and also Mary and her representatives on behalf of the Mesh Ireland Group to collaborate on the much needed aftercare and supports that are required to assist in our daily living needs following these life-limiting medical procedures. As you are aware, our journey for the specialist aftercare of this medical injury began here at Leinster House in late 2017, and lots have been discussed and achieved since then. However, now, following all the delays and restrictions of a global pandemic and the lifting of such unprecedented need, we can have an honest and open discussion on all suggested recommendations that come with the Chief Medical Officer's report of 2018 and the HSE's implementation plan for mesh injury. COVID-19 restrictions have all been lifted for the majority of people here. However, mesh injured patients will never have that opportunity to resume their quality of life again. We are extremely grateful for the support from across the board of government that has been shown to us to date, and for our issues being heard, and of all the background work which has been done in review of this horrific infliction. However, we are saddened to report, as recipients of this failed procedure, that although there has been learning reports, CMO reports, implementation plans and advisory committees, etc., nothing has changed. And we still live with the after effects of mesh injuring or limiting our life quality. Therefore, I feel it is easier to try navigate the necessary means which we can be introduced from you, the powers that be, in easing this life-limiting health scandal for all involved, as an optimistic view to improve our daily living needs and in assisting us breaking free from the detrimental consequences and effects which are inflicted upon us with no informed consent. As now it is widely known that there are minimal complete removal options of surgery for these surgical tapes here in Ireland, with no success or complication credentials as requested annually. These interventions stem across the whole thoroughfare of government department, but are necessary interventions that will make an exceptional difference to injured lives. 1. medical cards to all recognised mesh-injured patients from previous pathways, and HPRA registration to assist with medical costs, diagnostic need, medications, primary care, GP visits and acute services, that is, haematology, diabetic screening, optometry, dental, etc., from associated side effects of the mesh. Patient transfer, although so very grateful for the designated 2 mesh centres at Cork and Dublin, they are not realistically feasible to the majority of those in need of their services. So patient transfer is a vital need to avail of CMO's recommendations. Those injured by mesh are subjected to very invasive, painful examinations and cannot be asked to travel such a distance on public transport, although rarely accessible anyway, and suffer unconditionally following the pleasure. Accountability and an apology for accountability and an apology for mesh injury from our Health Service Executive and the Department of Health, as there were many warnings of the safety of these products from the Food and Drug Administration Authority. And although they came in through Europe's decentralisation system, they still ended up implanted in our bodies in our national public hospitals run and funded by the HSE and DOH. Number 4, patient advocates need to be included with the stakeholders in decision making for the upcoming steering committee on mesh injury, as it is these patients who hold the most valuable insight of the side effects endured following these failed procedures and the actions needed to prevent these horrific situations happening again. Number 5, honest communication with all advocate mesh groups from the stakeholders needs to be more forthcoming and transparent for this whole nightmare to begin to end. Trust needs to be re-established as it has completely broken down with all the gaslighting, ignorance and disrespect for the rebuild to confidence in trusting those who first do no harm. From the Women's Health Action Plan, dates are required for when the agreed compassionate engagement from December 2018 in lieu of an independent inquiry into mesh injury are going to take place, and the form of protocol that is to be used for this review. Dr. Gabriel Scally's review into the other women's health scandal of cervical check had a lot of identical issues raised, and its findings resonate so closely with mesh-injured ladies and this constant battle for justice. Number 7, when will the translabial scanner be available for use at the Dublin Mesh Centre and Cork Centre? Previous correspondence from government believes it to be available since the 1st of September 2021, which is not the case, and there is an anxious waiting list of mesh-injured ladies awaiting life-changing answers as to what damage their mesh is causing internally, so as to direct future intervention to ease their plight. These vital diagnostic machines came at great public cost, and it would be a shame to leave them go unused when such a wonderful non-invasive investigatory tool in mapping the mesh placement internally. Number 8. An update is also required from the CMO report as to the treatment suggestions in aftercare and the efficiency and effectiveness of the budget allocated. As in patient review, these treatments are not working and patients are still made to feel as though they are guinea pigs. So intervention is needed to occur as soon as possible, as some patients are coming out worse from participating in them. Yeah.
Can I ask you just to stop there, and we'll read it into the record of the meeting itself anyway. I'm just conscious that we're eating into the members' time,
okay,
and you know, I want to have as much frank discussion as possible. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Grant. And again, thanks for taking Terry's place this morning. She's on her way, we're told. So I'm going to open straight away up to members, and the first question here is Bernard Durkin. Bernard, you're very welcome. And again, I'll ask members to try and stick to the time.
Guests as well. I want to welcome them and thank them for their introductory remarks, and to obviously we must all empathise with women or anybody in receipt of any service for which they have a continued life-changing issue. And without saying any more, could I just ask a question? At this stage, how many post-mesh cases are being dealt with, have been recorded in here in the south and in the island of Ireland? That's the first question.
Who wants to take that? Again, if, someone, you're very welcome, Terry. Mary, if your team and Terry, your team, if you just indicate to me who wants to answer, you don't all have to answer, so.
I understand the question correctly. How many people are injured? Yeah. I give the NHS England stats because the HSE does not have any data. There's a common problem with data collection prior to the electronic records which means the first decade of mesh implantation is on manual records, so nobody wants to go back into those manual records. There's also a problem that these surgeries weren't given the correct code, so even if you went back into the records, you may find that it has been logged under a general women's surgery rather than a specific code for mesh implantation. So that is why I give the stats of NHS England for the last decade, and there was I think I said, was it 100,000, and that the complication rate is 15 to 20%. That was given by the CMO of England. The North doesn't have stats either. They have some stats just for the public healthcare system, and it was roughly, they had 10,000 women in the North. And of course, that's only the public healthcare system. A lot of women have had these surgeries also in the private healthcare system. There's absolutely no statistical data for that hidden sector.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bernard?
Thank you. You kindly told us about full removal versus partial removal.
Yes.
To what extent does the partial removal continue to take place, if at all? And that's a separate question. Yeah? Go ahead, please.
My experience from the women in my group from the south is that nobody has been offered a full removal of their surgery. And those people who already have had a partial removal, which might just be a very small portion of the mesh, that the surgeons are reluctant to not only do anything more with their mesh, but they're reluctant to do any surgery with them. So we have the added problem that when women get older, their organs start to prolapse. And in surgeons, because of the contentiousness of the surgery, new surgeons don't want these patients, they don't want to operate on these patients until they've had their mesh issue resolved. So there's lots of women who have extreme prolapse and they're being sent to non-surgical options in the system.
Terry, anyone for you?
Sure.
Well, it's the same
Yeah, go ahead.
in the south. It seems to be mostly directed towards partial removals only. I've read on the paper myself, as probably you have as well over the week, that 7 was done here in the south. But any time we've ever asked for any credentials on it, on success rates or complication rates or how many had been done, we were never given any statistics on it. So it's my belief that it's just partials is being complete at the moment.
It would appear, Chairman, that there's a huge lack of data and information and advice in relation to this entire matter. And I would be strongly of the opinion that there be an immediate appraisal of the entire numbers on waiting lists, the entire number of people who have had treatment, the nature of the treatment, and the results. And in order to put that data in order to address the issue fully, I think that data is required. Can I ask if it is possible for that to be done in short term?
Okay, thanks very much, Bernard. Okay, going to move on. Our next one is David Cullinan.
Or Margaret here.
No, wait a second, Chairman. I'd like the answer first. Can that be done?
The data collection? There is a problem because the women who are now trying to get their medical records to find out which implant they have, there's 3 or 4 main types, and then there's lots of different products. So not every product is identical, and for a surgeon to remove them, they need to know what product they're going to be taking out. And a lot of the women, when they get to their medical records, the implant sticker, which is meant to be adhered onto the surgical sticker sheet, is missing.
May I also add? I have been seen 4 different specialists through 19 years, and not one of the specialists connected the mesh to my injury. And even when I attended 2 mesh inquiry clinics, I was told in the second one, which was is Holles Street, that my injuries were nothing to do with my mesh. So if the women are being told that their injuries are not connected to mesh, then they don't know. So there needs to be a general information campaign in the general media in order to inform women, because their doctors are not informing them.
Okay, thanks very much. David.
Chairman, how many minutes each do we have?
Sorry?
How many minutes each do we have?
You have 5 minutes. Your 5 minutes is up, Bernard.
I know 5 minutes are up, that's right. Just in conclusion, can I just say that the lack of information, of data, and the entire scenario seems to be surrounded by a lack of information, failure to address the issues, and so on. And don't want to make too much of a comment, other than just to say, Chairman, that is an appalling vista from anybody looking in from the outset, that women should be treated in that fashion, and that women continue to be treated in that fashion, and that women continue to be applied to waiting lists in that fashion. That doesn't solve the problem.
Okay, thanks very much, Bernard. David, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, to all of our witnesses, I know it isn't easy to come before an Oireachtas committee on such a sensitive issue for yourselves, so I want to commend you first for speaking out and agitating and campaigning for yourselves and obviously for all of your members as well. Terry, just in terms of the opening statement, I know it was Margaret who read the opening statement into the record, but just a number of questions to tease out some of the recommendations that you make, or some of the asks that you make, and I'll come to Mary in a few minutes as well, because obviously we have the HSE in later, and we want to put some questions to them as well. So the first one in relation to medical cards. Is it the case that it's not universally available to mesh survivors, so there's no automatic right to a medical card, but that's something that you're seeking? Is that the ask?
Yes, and firstly, could I apologise for being late?
No, don't be worried, man.
But yes, there's every barrier being met with medical cards. Like that, people that have a husband working, obviously through the injury, that meshes after causing diversity in families is after changing, diversities in relationships is after changing. So I don't think you can necessarily say that a husband's wages, although they're married and whatever, is just going to be put into the wife's medical care.
Well, it's means tested. Okay, well, we'll tease it out with the HSE.
Yeah, but yet there's no allowances in that comparison for the means of the medical card. Women have been maimed. We went in with good faith to have this surgery done. They were maimed, not by themselves. So it's not their fault that they're in this position. It's not their husband's fault. It's not their job's fault. It's not their retirement fund's fault. Do you know? So, I think it's necessary that women will receive medical cards if they're injured by mesh. And there's a register now through the regulatory authority, and obviously if people are attending the pathways, they're registered under that, so they know exactly who has this device. And it's for necessities. It is for necessities. I don't know whether you're getting down to the total nitty-gritty of the price of hygiene products or whatever here, but these are available through community care. They're through incontinence care from the public sector as well. So I think women should be entitled to those things and not be at the greater expense through no fault of their own.
Okay, we've very limited time, so I have a number of questions I wanted to put, so thanks for answering that. I might just skip some of the other ones and we'll come back maybe later with the HSE. I just want to focus on 2 key issues, because obviously the range of treatments which are available are really important to you guys, and it seems to me that there is the option of a partial removal, a full removal, and for those then where that's not possible, there's pain management. but it seems to be the case from both opening statements that a full removal is not really an option in this state, and that for many women they have to travel abroad. But the treatment abroad scheme isn't effective and barriers are being put in the way. So I want, if I can, to ask both of you just to explain again what those barriers are, because that's really important, because in the opening statements that we have from the HSE, it mentions that scheme is working effectively, but yet we're being told by you guys, and obviously that is your experience, that it isn't working. And second of all, in terms of the National Mesh Complication Service, again, the HSE talks about the 2 centres in Dublin and in Cork up and running, treating patients. So can I again just ask, in terms of the translabial scan, which is obviously really important, is it your experience that that scanning equipment is operational both in Cork and Dublin, or is it that it's available only in one or only partially available? So maybe if you could give us your experience of what level of service has been provided, and that's both for Terry and for Mary. Thank you.
Well, my belief of it is 10 of us went, 10 people injured by mesh went for the training of our consultants for the translabial scanner last November down in Cork. We had it done, and that, as far as we were concerned, it was up and running from that point. Everybody was trained in. Then I received correspondence from the Minister, and they are under the belief that the one in Holles Street is up and running, but yet the people that's attending Holles Street is being told they can't be referred to Cork. The one they have up there is having technical problems. It's not up and running, but yet the government is under the belief that it has been running since the 1st of September last year. Now, down in Cork itself, I did approach a consultant down there, and I had asked about it, the translabial scanner. I was told to tell the ladies to get a referral down to him, and they'd see what could be done, but there's nothing at the moment.
Okay, and maybe the treatment abroad, Mary, if you could answer that question, if you could. Or Amanda.
I tried to access the treatment abroad scheme. I had been with my urologist for 3 years, and I had found out through a friend about mesh injury, and I applied, and my consultant had come to the end of his treatment plan. The only thing left was a hospital admission and IV treatment. So he said he would support me, wrote a letter, signed the form, but wouldn't write a letter addressed to my consultant initially. And then when in it implied that I had self-referred. So the treatment abroad scheme said that it wasn't available because the patient had self-referred, and they also subsequently, I was told from the ombudsman, who I then took the case up after I was referred. The ombudsman said that that my consultant shouldn't have said that there was no doctor in Ireland available to do it, and the consultant is assistant professor, and I've been with him for 3 years, and so it was just very difficult. And the ombudsman, the lady, she said that she wasn't getting answers from the HSE when she posed questions. Was there a similar treatment available here in Ireland? She didn't get an answer back. So it seems that the ombudsman doesn't have the ability authority to get the information and to actually look for the evidence as a solicitor would, and so therefore they've no clout to be able to make a judgment, and plus they're not medically trained to understand, so the HSE can say what they like.
Okay, I need to move on to Cal Rose next. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. Chairman, I want to welcome all of our witnesses here this morning. I've been educated over the last few weeks, and on Saturday I spoke with one of the injured mesh women in my own county. She wishes to remain anonymous, but she's here, and her story is one of pain and horror, and not being believed or trusted by our so-called best physicians. I just want to mention as well 2 people in the public gallery, Melanie Power, a solicitor in Limerick, who has led the spotlighting of this, and indeed Kitty Holland as well from the Irish Times, who has kept a real focus on this in the media. I just want to jump straight into questions. I have two main questions because I want to hear from yourselves more than anything, and I assure you at the outset of my full support. I think your story has been unheard, and arising from today there's a series of actions I believe government have to take, and as a Fianna Fáil member I'll be meeting hopefully with Stephen Donnelly later this evening to bring these to the heart of government. Just first of all, I understand there's two types of mesh implantments, TVT and TOT. TOT being the far more difficult form of implantation, and it's implanted close to, bear with me, the obtrudator nerve in the groin area. And I understand in Ireland a gynaecologist implants the TOT mesh, but in Britain you have a gynaecologist accompanied by an orthopaedic surgeon because of that whole complexity. I want to go a bit further with that because there's obviously some discrepancy here. If just a few hundred miles across the Irish Sea they believe two surgeons with different expertise and skill sets required, in Ireland we don't see that yet. I also want to hone in on the remark, and I won't name the professor chairman, but an eminent professor in Ireland has said that what is implanted in most medical cases should also have the ability to be removed. So I want to first of all ask Mary this question. I'll come to you in a moment, but I just want to ask, why is it that we don't have two surgeons in Ireland, and is there anyone dealing with mesh removal in Ireland at the moment, and to what success? And I use the word success very loosely.
There's a slight discrepancy in the information. The two surgeons are required in England, mostly are using two surgeons for mesh removal, full mesh removal. The transobturator meshes are implanted through the groin on each side and through the middle. And the problem is that the mesh is sitting in the obturator nerves. If you think of, if somebody has a hamstring injury, it's all that muscle band in your internal thigh that are the nerves going down. You cannot get at those two pieces of tape. So if I had a 30 centimetre tape, I would have 10 centimetres in my groin on one side, 10 centimetres through the middle, and 10 centimetres in the groin on the other side. Mandy and I have been abroad and we have had those tapes removed, so there's a large surgical scar on each side of the groin, and that's why it's very important to go to somebody that knows what they're doing, because there's a whole lot of tendons and muscle there, and if you get that wrong, women can lose their power in their legs. So the two surgeons being used as in the UK mesh MDTs are the surgeon that from the urogynecological field, and either a plastic surgeon or an orthopaedic surgeon.
So may there be a lack of skill set in Ireland, or I think if you do 5 surgeries a year to stay current and up to date, and presumably that isn't happening in Ireland. So there's people arriving with the scalpel at the surgical table, not fully skilled in that moment to perform a surgery. Would that be the nub of a lot of the problems here?
It's part of the problem, but if I just can clarify, in the removal, the need for the orthopaedic or plastic surgeon is about the approach that the urogynecological surgeon takes to finding the end of the tape in each side of your thigh. The world expert uses a tissue sparing, muscle sparing technique. If you have a plastic surgeon or an ortho surgeon in the operating room, the mesh surgeon goes in and uses a more rougher way of getting at the end, and he cuts muscle. The ortho or plastic surgeon...
If you'll forgive me, because the chairman's going to cut me out in 30 seconds. There's a very important question I just wish to briefly ask to Terry. Terry, the thing that really disturbed me was that some of our eminent physicians are saying that this is a problem of the mind. I've heard one patient tell me that it was suggested to him they've augmented pain syndrome, i.e. you're imagining it. No, I'm a man, so I can't begin to imagine what pain these women have gone through, but I know if I had toothache or any type of pain, whatever, if somebody told me it was in my mind, that in itself would drive me absolutely mad. Could you tell the committee here today, what has it been like for the women who've been told that this isn't a pain of your body and your nervous system, this is all in your mind?
Well, it has been told to many of the ladies about it. They've been attending doctors, GPs, everything over the years. Some has been put on nerve stimulant drugs and everything, reflecting that it's the problem of your mind. It's not a pain problem. And like that when it be stressed then that it was, because they simply don't know the solutions to it. It's affecting the effects of this device on all bodies. There's evidence for autoimmune diseases, there's evidence for pain, there's evidence, you know, for all different things after coming up now, and it's been researched, and the more it's been researched, the more things it's thrown up. There's blood disorders, there's 101 different case scenarios. It just destroys the body internally out.
Unfortunately, your time is run out. I just want to say that from destroying your body, losing your walk, any physician, and there's plenty of them watching here this morning, that is not a figment of the imagination. No. That's not something that a woman dreamt overnight and wakes up believing she has that pain. That is very real pain, and I think that needs to be central to our work here, Chairman, that this is real pain, an untold story, and that government and HSE need to appropriately pave a pathway here for these women. Thank you.
Welcome you all here today. Thanks for your presentation. And just to say, I'm really sorry that you've had such a negative and distressing experience of the Irish Health Service. And I mean, that raises huge questions, obviously, for the HSE, for the Department of Health, and it's our job then to take those issues up, as we will do later on with the authorities and beyond that. It strikes me that there's two aspects of this. The first is the fact that it would seem that the Irish Health Service isn't paying adequate attention to this issue. I mean, basic things like lack of data, lack of any meaningful statistics, even that issue that you mentioned, Mary, about the errors in the coding. So is there anybody at a senior level within the HSE who's actually dealing with this issue? Is there a named person whose responsibility?
National Women's Infancy Health Programme seems to be running the whole show, but as you were saying, like the overseeing of it, the implementation plan for the HSE is all the boxes are ticked. Do you know, it's just there's nobody to oversee the implementation.
But sorry, is it the view of both groups that if the implementation plan, excuse me, was actually implemented, that would address most of the issues? Do you think the plan is okay, or are there problems with the plan?
No.
You don't think the plan is okay, is that right?
No.
Okay, sorry, I just got that impression from what you were saying there. So there is no named person, senior person, who's kind of dealing with you and who has an overview of this entire issue?
I tried to contact, I've been in contact with the Minister. I've been writing to him through my journey since 2020. I wrote to the Medical Council. I've spoken to the person who's heading the patient pathway, and I asked for statistics. My background is healthcare. I was a midwife in the UK, and our evidence-based practice is fundamental. And I said, look, we have been injured. I need to know who is doing the surgeries, what is their experience, what are the outcome of the women that they have operated on. And she would give me no information.
Okay,
now, that's
that's a fairly basic problem then,
yeah.
If there isn't a person who has that overview and the handle of the situation. So we'll pursue that. The other aspect of it would seem to be that there is clinical kind of disagreement about the right approach. Now, I don't know whether that is kind of a genuine kind of clinical difference of opinion, or is it the fact that it's obviously cheaper to take the approach of partial removal and not cover the treatment abroad scheme and, the costs involved, which are substantial in travelling to St. Louis. So is there any kind of general acceptance of the best kind of treatment, on a WHO level or on a European level? Is the clinical thinking that the best approach is full removal?
The British Society of Gynecology have recently updated all their information leaflets and now have proper leaflets where the different stages of removal are illustrated and the risks. There is a view that partial removal is not the way forward. The Scottish Parliament heard evidence from a lead surgeon. And I would encourage the committee to maybe arrange a video conference with the surgeon that can tell you exactly what's going on.
Okay.
The problem is, as patients, we are asking for choice. But if we have a body of surgeons who never went to the bother of learning these skills over the years, the women are going into appointments, and the appointments go something like this. I'd like my mesh removed. Oh, no, you don't. You don't really want your mesh removed. Yeah, there's full removal. No, that's a really dangerous operation. Well, an operation is always dangerous if the community doesn't have the skills. So the skill set's not there. And the skill set wasn't there in the UK, it wasn't there in Australia, it wasn't there in Canada, it wasn't there around the world. We're not unique in that thing. But you can't gain that special skill set by doing a few operations.
Okay, fine. And just, I've only a couple of seconds left. Just on that thing about the skill set, that's one thing, and presumably could be addressed, you know, if there was proper funding put into training. Though I note that NHS Scotland are contracting with St Louis rather than training their own people. So, I mean, we'll raise that afterwards. Just a couple of quick questions. I don't know if you're in a position to provide the answer. You said about the discrepancy between public and private patients. Are private patients, do you know, being covered by their insurance companies to travel abroad?
Yes.
For full removal? Yes. Do you know if many of those have taken place?
I know several women on our group. A lot of the women, they're on the group and they do their thing, and they're private and they don't tell.
Sure,
but I do have
that.
examples of that where private health insurance is paid for some of their treatment.
They're not covered, you're saying? Sorry. Okay, so it depends on the company.
I can forward you that information.
I'd appreciate that, thanks. Yeah. And the other question is, have any full removals taken place in this country? Not that we are aware of. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks again. I just need to move on now to Nessa Horrigan. She's not here. Gino Kenny.
Thanks, Gerlach, and good morning, everybody. Just a number of questions, and I don't want to be kind of repetitive in relation to some of the questions that have been already said. So my first question is, obviously this procedure was paused in 2018 in the state. Is the procedure still available outside the state? For example, is this procedure still available in Europe for women to get done?
The implantation, to the best of my knowledge, yes, there's not the bans in Europe. There are pauses, but to the best of my information, yes, they're still taking place.
Okay.
But the UK
in relation to the treatment abroad scheme, how many women have accessed this scheme in the state thus far?
None, to my knowledge.
None.
I did it last year. I tried to access it.
Right. And Amanda, were you successful?
No, I was unsuccessful, and I went to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman posed questions to the HSE, and when I spoke to the caseworker, she said some were unanswered.
Right. And why do you think you weren't successful in accessing the scheme abroad?
The answers didn't make any sense. I was told I hadn't accessed the patient pathways, and I had been to 2 mesh clinics. I had been in touch with the patient pathways, and I had been continuously with one urologist for 3 years prior to going, being seen very frequently. So it didn't make any sense, actually, their refusal. And that I had self-referred.
Okay. And do you know how many women have tried to access the travel abroad scheme? Is there because obviously there doesn't seem to be kind of a collection of data around this particular issue.
No. Can I just say, when the HSE's position is that we have these surgeries available in Ireland, for a treatment abroad scheme administrator, if the official position is the women can get the surgeries here in Ireland, then how can they give us access to the public funds to treat abroad? I mean, that's a...
And Gino, could I just add as well, When the translabial scanner became available in 2019, now granted that was before the COVID, when it was initially supposed to start, it was that March the treatment abroad scheme was taken away. It had been granted by Simon Harris when he was the Health Minister, but then it was taken away in the March of 2019. Now, it was only in the last correspondence that I got that said the treatment abroad scheme was available for complications that can't be dealt with in this country. But in the meantime, we have a member who has actually sanctioned the treatment abroad scheme for one surgery in the UK, but the surgery needed it needed a reconstruction after the initial removal, and that wasn't sanctioned. So there was no point, she couldn't go ahead with it because she had only one end of the surgery available to her on the treatment abroad scheme. And I've heard nothing more about it, as I said, until the last correspondence with the Minister, and where he had said that the treatment abroad scheme was back available for complications that couldn't be dealt with in this country. So.
And that would be mostly in the United States where that procedure could take place.
Sorry?
Okay.
Also, the US is where the procedure
Yes.
people are looking to.
No, the UK as well.
If I could just explain, the mesh pathways, we have a local MDT, and they deal with what they call non-complex complications. So the women have to go through that step, and only if that local MDT merits that they can go to the mesh complications MDT. Do the women get on the next step? And then the mesh complications MDT, they get to decide whether they can operate or not. And if they decide they can operate, then the woman is kept in the local services. So there's a non-complicated level, a complicated level, complex level, and only if the complex team say they can't do it, will they start to look elsewhere. So the women, there's a lot of steps to get through, and the women are falling at the first hurdles.
There's no patient-centred care involved with mesh injury. We have to rely on people that's indirectly affected by it, but to sign forms for us to avail of the services that's suggested, which is just unacceptable.
I know your injury must be compounded by being told that this is kind of psychosomatic in relation to certain medical professionals saying that this is all in your head, that this is nothing related to the procedure that was done. How does that how does that make you feel in relation to healthcare in Ireland? That this is people are saying, look, this is nothing to do with the procedure you got done. This is essentially all in your head.
You're hoping that the mesh clinic is going to bring a resolution, and it's your last stop, and then you're told it's not the mesh isn't your problem. We have lots of young women coming in here with infections, and not even to examine you, having waited all those years. I mean, hope deferred makes your heart really sick. I was really sick walking out.
Not to be egotistical, but if I hear now that a consultant is going, your problems is not the mesh, and not to sound in any way egotistical, I do think to myself, do you even have the credentials to have this job, this profession of trust that you are in? That's the way I look at it now, because it's not a reflection on us. As I said, we trusted in who was supposed to help us. So it's not a reflection on us that they can't fix us for what's been caused.
But with respect, having a scanner doesn't mean that you have the skills to be able to use what you find after you've used the scanner. So the scanner of itself isn't an answer. And international best opinion would say that the consultant who inserted your mesh is not always best placed to remove it, but may feel duty-bound to do it because he's put it in and it's caused all the issues. But it's a completely different skill set, a subspeciality that needs a specialist clinic, 1 or 2 doctors that's consistently all they're doing. Our doctors are involved in multiple other disciplines within urogynecology, and it's just not possible. We're too small a country to gain that level of expertise with good outcomes. And they're quite right to say they couldn't do it, or that they say that it's not recommended. It's not recommended because the skill set isn't available to them. And it's not a reflection on the doctors. There's huge constraints on our medical field.
Okay, I need to move on to thanks, Gina. Senator Martin Conway.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And a couple of the questions I was going to go over have been asked already, but just to welcome you and to just applaud you for your bravery. It's certainly a horrific situation, and again, like others, I suppose I'm relatively new to the consequences of this, but it's something that has to be dealt with, and I will be recommending to this committee that we send a short report after this engagement with yourselves and the HSE to the Minister, because clearly the level of supports are not acceptable. The recommendations that have been made are fairly clear-cut, certainly in terms of medical cards and supports like that. That just should be a given. Roisin touched on the issue of private and the health insurance and what's covered and what's not covered. Just a question. Is there any surgeon or consultant that's operating in the private sector specifically that has had any advancement in this area in this country? No. No. Okay. Just in terms of the health insurance, I know Roisin asked about health insurance covering people to go abroad. Clearly that's not happening. Is there issues with the health insurance covering? It's happening in some cases, but is there issues with health insurance covering procedures in this country?
Well, if there's no surgeon can do the procedure you want. Yes.
Okay. Just another question. Has anybody successfully been treated in terms of resolving this issue anywhere?
I've had my mesh removed, but in America.
I've had mine removed last September, and I'm a different woman.
Okay, so it has.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Well, look, I suppose at least there is a medical. There can be a successful medical resolution to it.
Yes.
There's a huge cost to it as well.
Sure.
If you haven't got private insurance, there's a huge cost to going across seas. There's many women that have borrowed 20 to 30,000 credit unions and banks to get it. I'm one that still have the mesh inside me, and unfortunately I can't financially afford to get it taken out at the moment.
If I could on that, the costs would have been affordable to the State of Ireland in 2018 when I first wrote to the State. I had contacted Dr. Oireachtas and said, look, I have a group and the women aren't getting any services. If I contacted the government and they brought you into Ireland, would you come on a sort of waitlist initiative? And he at that time, he said he would come for 6 weeks and operate 6 days a week. And he does this every day. He doesn't need to come to Ireland. He can sit in St. Louis and do his work. But he thought it was a worthy project. And I wrote a letter and said, there's this doctor, I'd like to connect you if you want to speak to the doctor. And there was no substantive response. And I then took that campaign to Scotland. And this doctor interacted with the Scottish government. And basically, the problem was that there wasn't a single medical professional that would fill out the paperwork to bring this esteemed world surgeon in. So as a background to it, there's a lot of litigations going on, and the women don't have any records. On our records, it doesn't state we're mesh injured. And that, I think, is a background story as to why the medical community may be averse to bringing in an independent expert. We could, in the time we sit here, at least one woman could have had her mesh removed.
Yeah.
At least
Well,
one woman.
it would seem a very logical approach to if there is somebody of that calibre who's prepared to relocate here for a period of time to do surgeries. And again, that's something we can engage with the HSE in, and it's something that if we do a short report, Chairman, that we could put to the Minister. So look, I mean, we as a committee, I've no doubt, I speak for everyone, we would be very supportive of trying to get a resolution for you. So, and you know, we certainly will do our best in that regard.
It wasn't at a political level that the blockage was, it was within the medical profession that someone just didn't fill
Medical
in.
profession themselves.
Well, you know, the First Minister of Scotland got involved at one stage. There was the CMOs involved. The doctor in America hosted the Scottish surgeons, and every time he was meant to be coming into Scotland, there was delay and delay and delay. And at some point, he felt as if he was being used. And, you know, the promises of hope that he was coming, he wasn't prepared to be used anymore, because he said, the women think I'm coming in spring. And he says, I'm telling you, that's not on the table, and nobody has approached me. They have procured his services, and to date, not a single woman from Scotland has been sent out. So there's a lot of, on the face of it, there's progress. But for the women, our lives are exactly the same. I lay in bed. My son said to me the other day, 16 hours a day, I lay in bed.
Absolutely. No, well, thank you very much, and thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now back to Fine Gael. Colin Burke.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentations here. And I know it's been a very difficult time for everyone involved. Can I just go to the issue in relation to treatment abroad? Because I think there's an issue here in relation to treatment abroad and the cross-border healthcare directive.
Yes.
And I was involved at the European level in the cross-border healthcare directive. And my understanding in relation to cross-border healthcare directive, you're entitled to medical care under cross-border healthcare directive in another member state of the European Union if you cannot access treatment in your own country or there is undue delay. Now, my understanding now, the difficulty about the cross-border directive is that if you go abroad for treatment under a cross-border directive, you have to pay for it yourself and then seek the refund. That's the disadvantage of it. But I'm just wondering, has anyone tried to use the cross-border directive in order to get that care? I know the problem is that you have to pay for it yourself first and then get the reimbursement, but has anyone gone through, because the cross-border directive now is different from treatment abroad. Yes. And I'm just wondering if anyone has gone through that mechanism.
I think they mentioned that, but because Taz stated that there were doctors in the state who are doing the surgery here, that it wasn't necessary.
No, but you see, if there's undue delay, in regards, because that's quite clear, I was involved in the drafting of it back 10, 15 years ago.
Okay.
And there's quite a clear directive. If there's lack of access, or the alternative, there's undue delay. So the undue delay mechanism could be used in relation to the use of the cross-border directive. And I'm just wondering.
Prior to Brexit, we have a member that went over and through the cross-border directive had surgery, came back and applied for the reimbursement. Now that's actually in the hands of the Ombudsman at the moment, because it turns out the person in question had a private insurance as well, but there was a discrepancy with that as well. So with the private insurance, they wouldn't pay out, but they had reimbursed some of the money just from her normal direct debit every month.
Okay.
And what happened then was, when she applied for the cross-border, they said about this with the Ombudsman for the insurance company, and it's in limbo since. It's on hold.
But obviously, my view on this thing is the cross-border directive was specifically designed at a European level. Started in 2007, went through, came into Ireland about 2012 eventually. It was transposed into Irish law. It is there. And I mean, my view is that it's an effective way of using that mechanism. And if then the funding is refused, then obviously my view is it's a judicial review issue to get an overall decision on that, but that's one issue. The second issue I just want to touch on is about, we've got figures from the HSE about the special clinics that they've set up in Cork and in Dublin, and the figures they're giving us is 40 have attended Cork and something like 69 have attended Dublin, and there's 16 on the waiting list. Now, those figures seem to me to be really small compared to the figures you're talking about, which is 750.
Yeah.
Is there a specific reason why people are not going to these clinics? Is it just that they're not aware of these clinics, or they're not being referred to them?
They're just not aware that they have the problem. Personally, I was at a consultant last week, and I happened to meet a lady in the waiting room, and like that, the lady has had numerous amount of surgeries over the years. She's after having organs removed from her and everything, and it was after, I don't know where she was after seeing something about the mesh, and she was going in to ask him directly, was it the mesh had caused her problems all over the years, and her answer to that question was probably.
But surely, you know, there's a small number. I think we have about 160 obstetricians, gynecologists in this country. Surely it's an easy mechanism to get information out to them, and that they would be aware of these special clinics. And are you saying that people are not being referred either by GPs or by consultants who's under whose care they are to these specialist clinics?
The learning reports were sent out to the maternity hospitals of the country, the group level hospitals, but at primary care, we say like GPs, casualty, A&E, they weren't informed of it. Now, I'm sure they're aware of it now after hearing and having so many people come and go at different times, but there's no actual implementation of it even in the hospitals.
You do accept that if we're talking about a figure of 750 who had this treatment?
Oh yeah, I'd say you're talking more like thousands.
Okay.
And I'd say care homes are full of people.
How many, sorry, did you say? Sorry, I didn't get the figure.
Personally, I think that you're talking thousands, and care homes are full of people with mesh.
All right, okay. Can I just ask then, in relation to collection of data, as I said, the number of obstetricians and gynecologists in the country is around 160, 170. Surely to God, the number of obstetricians carrying out this procedure would have been quite small in real terms.
Yeah.
It would have been, what, 15, 20?
19, I think, was.
19, but surely that is easy. It would be easy to go through their records to identify the real numbers we're talking about.
You would think.
What is the mechanism as to why that's not being dealt with?
I don't know. I think, as Mary was saying, I think there needs to be a media sort of a thing about anybody, just in awareness.
You're saying that there was only 19 consultants dealing with this issue?
There was 19 that put it in group
okay,
level
that's what I'm saying to you, 19
yeah.
that put it in, right? So therefore, and we're talking about from a period of what, from kind of 2000 to 2018?
No, 1998, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where were you?
I was 2000, but yeah, there was one before me, a few before
me. So you're really talking about 19, you're talking about 20 years really?
Yeah, 22.
Okay, so in real terms, if you're talking about 19 consultants over that period, maybe there's 2 or 3 would have retired halfway through. But surely to God we could get all of that information as regards identifying the real numbers. And then the other issue is about making sure that every one of them is made, those patients, is made aware of the follow-up care that's now available in these clinics.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Yes. And like that, at the time when they were putting them in, there was literally, with HPRA, there was actually only one consultant who had reported an adverse reaction to the mesh. And because it's not compulsory for them to do so. Like, I think things like that, if they're putting it, well, I know now regulations in Europe is after doing a whole big thing now since this, but it's just, like, people need to be aware. People don't know they have it.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Ruth.
Senator Mary Seary. Karen,
thank you very much. And thank you for here substituting for Senator Sean Kine. So thank you very much. I suppose, first of all, thank you very much to the committee and to yourselves for coming in. This is something that I've been aware of for a number of years. And so when Senator Coyne gave me the opportunity to come in and speak, I thought, oh my goodness, this finally, there is going to be a tranche of this getting out into the public arena, and mindful of people like Kitty Holland who have spoken about it over the year. No woman should have to come before a committee and speak about matters of such a personal nature in order to get action. So I think, and unfortunately, there is quite a history of seeing women having to do that and bare their souls in order to get action. I'm going to be very, I suppose, rudimentary in how I want to bring it through, because it's based on some of the cases and instances that I know of. In the first instance, women maybe don't necessarily know. They know they had a treatment, but they don't know that that treatment was mesh.
Yes.
So would that be the case?
Yes.
Is that, so I think that's an important thing for us to say.
Yes.
Women have complications. They don't even know the right questions to ask.
Yes. Yes.
So I know I had my appendix out when I was a kid. I know there's a scar. I know there's whatever. But if you know there was an intervention, but it wasn't necessarily mesh, then you're already disadvantaged, which brings up the whole question of consent in the first instance. But let's say we move on from there. I have a concern over consent with regard to treatment. If you have a medical a community that are, in the first instance, in some instances, denying its existence, the existence of the complications, because they're saying it's psychosomatic, or if that's the first place. So if that's the first resort, and in one woman I know of, that's exactly what she's been told over and over again, and trying to move beyond that is very, very difficult. So if the first recourse is that this is your imagination, then that you have the lady like you have that has had numerous other interventions and then goes back eventually and goes probably, then you have, it's nowhere on the checklist of consultants to make sure, well, let's make sure, is there a mesh here, and maybe there are complications, because they're not even in that sphere to consider it. So that's something that we, so then when a treatment is recommended, if there is a final decision to treat or to intervene, then in that instance, if they're not open to a full removal, if they're not open and they're limiting the options, then actually it's not fully informed consent to intervention. Yes. Isn't that the case? Yes. So I suppose that's something that I would ask this committee to make sure is in the report following up on here, that the consent that's being given to the intervention in this country is not adequate if you have, and one of my big questions down was, what is motivating the denial and the obstructionism and all of that? I think, Mary, you very clearly answered to that. But it would appear that litigation is limiting progress. Yes. Or the fear of litigation is limiting progress. And a mechanism needs to be put in place, I think, for this committee to recommend that needs to be set aside. Whatever's happened has happened. Yes. We need to absolutely drive progress. And I know that St. Louis, from a number of other situations that I have been involved in, I know that St. Louis are fantastic on particularly microsurgery. They have the leading people in the world in a load of areas on microsurgery, and the sheer level of finesse and that is required for removal, clearly that is their expertise. I just want to end, and I mean, you've given me the answers that I want to do, so apologies, I'm speaking and I have to fly, so I won't be here for the HSE piece. But I suppose that is that point of when women are giving their consent to an intervention in Ireland, if it get to that place, and I think, Amanda, you very clearly, it is not fully informed. It is not, and it needs to be dealt with. That needs to be dealt with. I'm sorry, I've done too much.
Can I just come in? Another reason why the mesh pathways isn't having a big uptake? If you have been treated for 20 years or 10 years, you've had urodynamics, you've had vaginal examinations which are very painful. You have done all these soft options, and now this creation of this new mesh pathways, it's the same doctors and the same soft diagnostics, and the women say, I'm not travelling there to have urodynamics done, to have internal examinations done, to have this humiliating process repeated. So the informed consent is nearly coerced, because if you don't do the pathway, if you go in and say, look, I've had all this stuff done, I just want it out, please. You're being forced into all these tests and translabial scans, and it's delay and delay and delay. It can take years to get an appointment Women wait for an appointment and then they go to the hospital and it's not even the consultant. They have a junior doctor who doesn't even know anything about mesh.
Yes.
And the women are in tears in the car parks coming out.
And meanwhile, people are suffering.
Exactly.
And that needs to come to an end.
Exactly. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Chair and Committee.
Joe Kerry, TD's next.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I want to welcome all the witnesses here. Thanks very much for this really positive engagement. I want to compliment both groups for your campaign on this issue. It's something that was brought to my attention recently by a constituent whose life was turned upside down. You know, really, and to just have that conversation with that lady and to understand what she's gone through is just unbelievable. It's life-changing. I think what Amanda said there earlier on, that when you had your surgery, your life changed for the better, and I think that is really key. And the full removal of the mesh seems to be the optimal solution, but it's how to get there. We obviously don't have the skill set in this country to do it. There's no confidence in women to engage in the current system that we have. So that needs to be radically changed. In terms of the pathways, I'd like to establish what type, the current one, what type of engagement was there with your groups in setting up the pathways? Was there any engagement at all?
No.
With the HSE? No. Would any of your groups have met with the Minister for Health, the current Minister for Health? No.
I've been in correspondence with him since 2020, documenting my story, and his secretary said he's committed to women's health, but nothing. And I've documented to him the gaslighting that I experienced and cognitive dissonance that was just so apparent.
Okay. And, like, obviously you'd like to meet with the Minister and just put out, like, Terry, your opening statement, you've outlined 8 or 9 different issues that you need to be addressed, and Mary, you've outlined those as well. And obviously, I mean, we've moved on. We've come through a pandemic as well, so it's time to refresh, you know, what was there and upgrade it and make it fit for purpose for women. It's obviously this system isn't working. Yes. Like, it's interesting, Deputy Shortall mentioned the collaboration between Scotland and St. Louis. Is that an option that you would have confidence in if the medical people from St. Louis were to, you know, have a clinic here or presence here in Ireland to carry out these type of surgeries, the full removal?
Well, it's only one surgeon, and the surgeon is now 63. When I started this, he was not yet 60, and women around the world travel to him. So he has been insulted by the treatment that he received in relation to the Scotland project. So that would be something that government would have to engage with him. If he was treated with respect, the women could be operated on here. They'd have their families around them. The journey home after that major surgery from America to here, and you're not with your family and friends when you have your operation. It's very, you know. So what I'm saying is, I don't know if the world expert would engage, but he spent 2.5 years or 3 years talking to the Scotland government and all this thing, and the fact of the matter is they haven't sent anybody out to him.
Okay, I'm conscious that you know, we're talking about another jurisdiction, but we know that as a committee we would have written to the department and in relation to, you know, there was a specialist coming from London to upskill many of the surgeons in Ireland, and we know that there was a delay in relation to because of the pandemic of that individual coming over. And I think the last correspondence we had was that, you know, that upskilling work and that had gone ahead in relation to it. So again, that's something we as a committee can follow through. And I probably should have said at the start as you know, made a confession that I'm actually one of the people that I've had mesh and implant. I've had cancer, and again, when I suppose that this, you know, you all talked about the idea of an informed decision. You know, I had to make that decision when I suppose all the scans had broken a number of years ago particularly in relation to women, and had that long conversation with surgeons at that time. Was it right for me? You know, and I was hearing and reading and hearing from people and reading of the horrific injuries that had been perpetrated in relation to, you know, the implants of these mesh devices. And I'm one of the lucky ones that, you know, in that sense. And but I'm conscious that the fact that I've gone through it, that, you know, we need to do more for those who, you know, the system has failed. I made a commitment at the start of the meeting that we as a committee, we would follow through on this. We're going to have our next meeting with the HSE, but we also said in the next period when we resume in September that we will look again at this. I give a commitment on behalf of the committee that we will follow through on many of the issues that you have raised. Members have made suggestions in relation to what we should do in a review and a report in relation to this, but I give a commitment on behalf of the committee that we won't stop at today's, you know, let's look at today's meeting as the start of a conversation, and let's hope that those who clearly need supports will find some sort of let's hope that we can clear some of the pathways, the barriers in that pathway. I looked at, and you mentioned in your own report, the Cumberledge review, and again, you know, it would be a good starting point. You know, again, I'm conscious it's a different jurisdiction and so on, but for any jurisdiction that's looking at this issue, wherever it is around the world, and, you know, I'm thinking in terms of Ireland, it would be a good, you know, the recommendations in that report would be a good starting point for anyone that's going to try and address the issues there. And it's not about reinventing the wheel, but it is about addressing some of the harm that has been done to women in relation and men in relation to these mesh devices, and it lists a whole series of recommendations, and it'd be hard to disagree with many of them. And some of them are about, you know, it recommends a safety commissioner would be independent, public leader with statutory responsibility, champion the value of listening to patients and promoting users' perspectives and so on, and responsibility on companies and so on, and the upskilling of people and the data that's clearly missing and so on. So maybe that's something as we as a committee that we could look at that report, but also look at, you know, ways of helping the women that you represent to have a pathway to recovery and care. So we've unfortunately run out of time. I hope you found it useful. I hope all you in the gallery I welcome you here. And as I say, we've given a commitment that we will follow through on this issue. And wish you well as you move forward.
Thank you,
your recovery yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go into private session until we resume. Thanks again. In this session, we're meeting with the HSE to discuss issues relating to vaginal mesh implants. I want to welcome from the HSE Ms. Catherine Donoghue, General Manager, Commercial Unit, Treatment Abroad Scheme and Cross-Border Directive, Acute Operations. Dr. Cleena Murphy, Clinical Director, National Women and Infants Health Programme. Mr. Robert Kidd, Assistant National Director, Acute Operations. Dr. Susan O'Sullivan, Urogynaecologist, Cork Mesh Centre. Dr. O'Sullivan is only available for the first half hour, so if members have any questions regarding mesh centres, could they please indicate to the clerk, and we'll deal with those in the first half hour. All members are witnesses again reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges or against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you'll be directed to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you comply with any such direction. There is a pending litigation, as I said earlier, arising out of the use of mesh devices. Those cases have yet to come before the courts, which will decide the issues of fact and legal liability. In the light of the constitutional separation of powers and the respect that the Oireachtas must show for the courts, this hearing should not prejudice or attempt to second-guess or influence the outcome of that litigation. Witnesses and members should therefore avoid comments in which, in fact, prejudice the outcome of those cases, such as allegations of negligence or legal liability. So can I call on Mr. Robert Kidd to make your opening remarks? You're very welcome.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Chairman and members. Thank you for inviting us to update you in relation to vaginal mesh implants and the services we have in place to support people affected by complications in their use. The Chair has already mentioned that I'm joined by Dr. Cleena Murphy, Ms. Catherine Donoghue and Dr. Suzanne O'Sullivan. Mesh is a medical product used in a range of surgical specialties, but our focus today relates to mesh used in 2 urogynecological procedures in women: the treatment of stress urinary incontinence and pelvic organ prolapse. In November 2017, following the experiences of many women with mesh implants that were causing pain, infection or other complications, the then Minister for Health, Mr. Simon Harris TD, requested the Chief Medical Officer to review the clinical issues involved. In July 2018, the HSE paused the use of vaginal mesh implants for the treatment of SUI and POP. The CMO's report, The Use of Urogynecological Mesh in Surgical Procedures, was published in November 18. It gave a comprehensive history of vaginal mesh implants, their purpose and the problems experienced by some women that led to the pause in their use. The report had 19 recommendations covering 2 broad areas: responding to the needs of women experiencing vaginal mesh implant complications and considering how clinical practice in using vaginal mesh might operate should the pause be lifted. To date, 11 recommendations are completed, 5 are ongoing and 3 are no longer deemed clinically appropriate to progress. The 5 ongoing recommendations are prospective clinical recommendations and will be implemented if vaginal mesh implants are used again in the future. I'd like to outline the work done to meet the needs of the women and people affected by problems with mesh implants. In order to initially identify and assist those patients who needed support, assessment or had questions about their care or experience, a dedicated page on the HSE website was created with detailed patient information and guidance. The information was promoted in news media reports on social media and ensuring the page was easy to access on search engines. Each hospital group identified specific contact details for their patients and these were provided on the HSE site. Communications from approximately 70 women were received and all of the women who made contact were offered appointments either at the time or subsequently. A new national mesh complication service has been established with a centre in Cork and one in Dublin, and with the option to refer people for specialist care abroad where that is needed. The HSE put in place a 3-tiered response to mesh complications to ensure that women always had a pathway of care. Firstly, a woman experiencing post-mesh complications is advised to contact either their GP or the consultant who inserted the implant for a clinical assessment. Next, if specialist care is needed, they can then be referred to the National Mesh Complication Service. This service is delivered across 2 centres and provides expert specialist care to women during requiring mesh removal. The Mesh Complication Service has a multidisciplinary team in place with a range of medical specialties involved. The 2 hospitals providing this complication services are recognised urogynecology centres with subspecialist expertise. These centres have extensive experience in dealing with complex pelvic floor problems, including mesh complications. An additional HSE investment of 1.3 million was provided specifically for this service in 2021. The consultants involved in the care of mesh complications have specialist and subspecialist training, which is earned mostly abroad in the UK, US and Australia. In addition to this, an internationally renowned subspecialist training programme in urogynecology has been established in Ireland. The National Mesh Complication Service, which is a HSE public service, does not make a distinction between women who had their vaginal mesh implanted in a private or public facility. Information on how to access the National Mesh Complication Service is published on the HSE dedicated webpage and is available from all acute hospitals, GPs and patient representative groups. Both centres have full diagnostics available, including translabial scanning. In November 2021, a consultant urogynaecologist from the UK led a translabial and transvaginal teaching day and clinic in urogynaecology department in Cork. Feedback obtained from the women who attended the clinic was positive. There is an identified lead consultant within each centre for this service. To date, the centre in Cork has seen approximately 40 patients and currently has no waiting list. It has a designated mesh clinic which runs every 6 weeks. The centre in Dublin has seen approximately 69 patients and it has a waiting list of 16. We anticipate that all patients will have been seen by October 2022. The third tier of the pathway is the availability of treatment abroad. For some patients who have defined clinical complexities, access to treatment abroad gives an additional pathway when the level of complexity requires. An application for treatment abroad can be supported by the HSE National Mesh Complication Service. The care of the patient reverts to the referring consultant upon return to Ireland, and all follow-up care is organised through them. I would like to close by acknowledging once again the difficult experience of the significant number of women who have and are suffering serious complications from the use of vaginal mesh implants. The HSE hopes that the significant investment made in developing the dedicated services to support women will have a positive impact and outcome for people affected. We would like to take the opportunity to encourage anyone who may be suffering with mesh complications to contact their GP or the HSE for care and support. This concludes my opening statement.
Thanks very much, Robert. Dr. O'Sullivan, I'm conscious that you said you were available for till 11:30, so we're nearly a quarter past now, or 20 past. So I'll just kick it off. If any of our members, first of all, want to ask a question in relation to the mesh centres of Dr. O'Sullivan before she goes. David, and then Colin.
Thank you. Yeah, you might be able to clarify for us, if you can, the extent of the use of the translabial scanners. So the chair had indicated earlier, and we had correspondence previously, that there was a specialist from the UK who had to come over and train up staff. So we're getting mixed signals here, because from the HSE statement it seems to suggest that both scanners in Cork and Dublin are up and running and are performing, and yet we're being told by women who are here this morning that the one in Dublin is not operational. There was technical issues and there are also issues in relation to supports and transfers of patients who have difficulties getting public transport to get to those centres. So if you can maybe just explain to us what level of activity are we seeing, and especially or particularly in relation to those two scanners in both Cork and Dublin, if you can, first of all, please.
Thank you for your question. I'd just firstly also like to acknowledge on behalf of my colleagues and I the suffering and problems experienced by women who've had complications as a result of mesh procedures and surgery, and to sympathise fully with them for their suffering and ongoing problems. In terms of the translabial scanning, I can only speak to our services in Cork. So our machine was bought, and during 2021 it was set up in a dedicated space and clinic in November, and Dr. Rani Thacker, a very well-known and world-class urogynaecologist from the UK, came over, and we scanned 9 patients from around the country. 4 consultants came from Dublin also to attend and to learn from this training day and clinical day. The machine is there. We have a dedicated consultant who is imminently going to be appointed, who will continue with that service. I suppose it's important to say that translabial scanning can be helpful, but it's by no means the be-all and the end-all in terms of assessing patients. And often it's actually, not necessary, because we can see clinically without needing a scanner where the issue is. If there's a problem of vaginal mesh erosion, for example, into the vagina, we don't always need a translabial scan. So I can't speak to the Dublin services, I'm afraid. I can only speak to our own services.
Okay, just one quick follow-up. So I'm not clear if the scan is actually in full use, because what you said is there was a small number of scans done, and I accept what you're saying, that it's a judgment that has to be made in relation to whether or not that's necessary, but obviously the women will have their view as well. But when you say a consultant, a dedicated consultant will be appointed, is that person not appointed? So at this point in time, you say the scanner is in Cork, it has its own location, that's fine, but is it in use? Is it operational?
It is. We have not done any further translabial scans since November. We have one patient who will benefit from this intervention, who is awaiting the appointment of the new consultant who will lead with that service and who will be trained in that.
Okay, Colin.
Yeah, just in relation to the number of people who are having complications with this matter, my understanding is that, you know, the figures we've been given is that over 750 people have had mesh implants, yet the figures out of Cork and out of Dublin about people who've attended the treatment centre is quite small. So I'm just wondering, is the information out there with GPs about these two clinics, and is it out there with consultants right across the board in relation to people who would be dealing with women who are running into complications, and what further work can be done in order to make sure that people are aware that there is a specialist clinic dealing with it?
I suppose locally, certainly our colleagues in general practice are aware of it, as are our colleagues in urology, and we've worked very hard to set up what we believe to be very good and holistic services, with an aim to be as holistic as possible in the approach to treating women, because it's a very complex situation. It's just not one fix answers all problems. So we've got two consultant urologists who work as part of our MDT. We have 3 subspecialty consultant urogynecologists and a 4th to be appointed. We have extra physiotherapists and nurse specialists who've been appointed as a result of the investment from NWHIP into our services in terms of dealing with these patients and trying to address the problem. I suppose it's not a new problem, and as a urogynecologist, we've been over 20 years using mesh to treat problems for patients and dealing with complications as they arise. I suppose any surgeon knows that there is no intervention that is risk-free or completely safe. That goes across the board, no matter how minor the intervention is. But we have worked really hard in terms of looking and being able to provide a holistic approach, including pain, psychology support, psychiatry support where required, physiotherapy, and surgical intervention. And when we do procedures and we look after patients with seriously complex issues and we undertake surgery, there is always a minimum of 2 consultants and usually 3 or 4 at the more difficult and complicated cases. And we counsel the patients extensively beforehand, work together and with the woman to try and address the problems as best and as safely as we possibly can.
But just on the numbers, do you think that 40 attending the Cork Clinic, and that's, I presume, Cork Clinic would cover all of Munster, do you accept that it's quite a small number in view of the overall concerns raised by women across the country, that, you know, is there an explanation as to why the number is so small that's attending these clinics?
I suppose there are, well, we've 2 groups probably. We have groups of, we've patients who have an absolutely clarified mesh complication. For example, the mesh has eroded into the vagina, or it may have gone into the bladder or the bladder neck. That's a small cohort of patients with absolutely clear problems. We also have a huge cohort of patients who have other issues, for example, related to maybe recurrent urinary tract infections, who also happen to have had a tape or a mesh in the past. But those issues may be directly related to their tape or may not be directly related to their tape. So those patients have always been attending our services. And it's only since we've set up these services that we have a separate coding for patients with, you know, very clear mesh, very directly, clearly mesh-related complications. But I suppose they're not hugely surprising, because We haven't done any operations in the last 4 years. So we're not dealing with women, we're dealing with women who've had surgery prior to the implementation of the pause. And I suppose, you know, while we know that many procedures were done in the past, a lot of them were very successful and were not associated with complications.
Okay, great, thanks.
I welcome our guests, and just a couple of questions. It would appear to me that there's a great deal of contradiction and confusion. First of all, in relation to the advice and the proper availability of assistance to the women that have been affected, both contradiction and confusion, and that the level of pain and suffering that they have endured as a result of the procedure in particular, and the neglect, as they see it, to the proper response to their calls for help. Would you agree with that?
Listen, as I say, I know that there have been problems, and I've heard the women this morning, and I've met a lot of them in my clinic. And there's no doubt that there have been problems caused as a result of these operations. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. I would say that, again, our door is always open. We prioritise any patient who is referred, or any woman who's referred with a problem related to mesh. So we get them into our system as quickly as we possibly can. We prioritise them over other patients, and it's a big issue for us because with COVID, our waiting lists have really, really grown. But we have dedicated time, we have dedicated multidisciplinary team. We discuss all the complicated patients. We schedule surgery, you know, because some of these operations can be very, very big. They can last for several hours, and you know, we have to put at least sometimes a half a day and often a day aside to do the really complicated surgical mesh removals when required. I believe, you know, as again, I can speak for our services in Cork. We are absolutely cognizant of the issue. We aim to do our very best by the women who come to us. We prioritise referrals. We see them as quickly as possibly. We offer them, again, a large range of interventions. I suppose one of the questions is this question around total mesh removal. And I suppose one of the problems is that when we see people, we look at their issues and we try and look at causative factors and what is going to make them better. And often total mesh removal, from my clinical perspective, our multidisciplinary clinical perspective, may not be, we feel, in the best interest of the patient. And it's a difficult dilemma to be trying to say, look, if there are other solutions to issues which may or may not be related to the mesh, and that we look at trying interventions like physiotherapy, pain management, etc. We definitely will remove the mesh when we are convinced that it is the absolute root cause of problems, and when we are very confident that it is going to make the woman better. But the difficulty is often, the concern is that the full mesh removal can make things an awful lot worse and can leave the woman much worse off afterwards. And we've had problems and looked after women who've come back from abroad and from the UK after total mesh removal, who have had very, very significant problems, and who have been really harmed and have had dreadful complications as a result of surgery.
Why have such women why do they go abroad?
I honestly don't know.
Was there medical evidence or support available for or against their going abroad? I don't understand your question. Well, did they have medical advice before going abroad as to whether or what they might do in those circumstances? And
I don't know.
And last question, Chairman.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm going to go back in.
The doctor. Okay. I'd just like to ask Dr. O'Sullivan.
Hold a second, Chairman. Just a second. The question is, has the HSE accorded sufficient importance to the particular issue and in such a scale as to be able to respond positively?
Bernard, with respect, it's a question for the HSE who are here. You know,
well, I know, but I'm asking.
Bernard, will you listen? Bernard,
I just want to ask a question.
We have a couple of seconds left. We've one of the senators here wants to ask a question in relation to the centre in Cork.
I have just a very quick question for Dr. O'Sullivan. Does she, like, we get the impression, we've engaged with the women here this morning, and there certainly seems to be pushback within the medical community to women who are in horrendous situations exploring options and medical procedures abroad. Is there a certain reluctance or hesitancy among the doctors in terms of thinking outside the box and supporting these women?
I suppose when a woman comes to me with problems, I will look at the issues and look at all potential causes for her problems and issues and try and treat those issues the best way possible. I suppose one of the problems is some women feel, and they come and they're saying they want the mesh completely removed. But if I, as a clinician, I'm fairly confident that A, it may not make their problem any better, and B, it has a high chance of making their problems an awful lot worse and leaving her in a much more devastating situation. That's a huge ethical dilemma for us. So I can't recommend what I think is major and potentially mutilating surgery that I don't believe is going to be in the interest of the patient. I just can't do that. And I have to be honest with women. It's not pushback. We're here to do our best. We're here to try and help them. We're here to make them better. And we have options to do that. And we, as I say, we offer lots of different things, including mesh removal when it is absolutely the right thing for them. But again, it's very difficult when there's a belief there that total mesh removal is the panacea. And as I say, that trying to be pushed into doing an operation that I genuinely believe is harmful and in no way good for a woman is a difficult situation. So I don't mean to be pushing back, but I can only be honest about what I think is going to help somebody and what I can do to make them better. And usually that, we don't start with total mesh removal as the first standpoint in terms of dealing with issues, whether they're bladder problems, urinary tract infections, pain, difficulty with intercourse. The variety of symptoms and problems is absolutely huge, and therefore the ways of dealing with them and making the woman better is also. There are many options. There is not just one quick fix solution. And that's where I think we have to be very careful. And as I say, we're aiming to provide a holistic, multidisciplinary...
Hold on, Martin. Thank you, Dr. Son, but we had a lady here this morning who had her mesh removed and she said that she was a new woman after, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks. Can you take another question, Dr. Sullivan?
I can.
I'm conscious you're eating into the...
I'm just on call at the moment, but I can take another question.
Are you sure? Okay, Roisin.
Just one very quick one, Dr. O'Sullivan. You said you had seen a number of women who had significant problems and who were harmed by having the mesh removed abroad. How many women would you have seen?
Good question.
I suppose in our unit, we've certainly seen probably at least two and maybe a third. I personally have dealt with one, but we have, as I say, 5 consultants between us in our department.
And over what period would you have seen two?
Probably over the last 5 years or so. Again, I can't be exact with those timelines, but over the last 5 years or so.
And presumably you wouldn't have had any cause to have contact with women who had successful removals?
I have not seen here any patient who has had full mesh removal successfully done abroad, no.
Okay, so just 2 so far. And have you any idea about the Dublin clinic?
No, I can't.
No.
I have no idea.
Okay, thank you.
Can you, maybe just before you go, for people that are unaware of the actual mesh itself, the difficulties in removing the mesh, do you want to explain that, the skin grows through the mesh and the difficulty of actually removal?
Well, there are various different types of mesh. So it's not one size fits all by a long shot. So there are tapes for incontinence, and they can go in through two different places. So the challenges of removing these, there are different challenges depending on which tape we're looking at. The mesh that's used for vaginal prolapse is different. It's a larger surface area, and therefore, again, the challenges of full removal and the sequelae of scar tissue formation and poor vaginal function and sexual function after full mesh removal surgery is a real issue. And, you know, again, it's just so important that, you know, if the mesh is in the wrong place, it's got to be removed. So if it's in the bladder or if it's come through the vaginal skin, there's just no doubt about that. But it's not always clear that symptoms are directly related to the mesh, and therefore that full removal of the mesh is going to sort out the symptoms. And the problem is that we want to deal with the symptoms, we want to make things better as safely and as possibly and causing as little harm as possible. And as I say, you know, nobody is ever saying that total mesh removal is not ultimately going to be the right thing, but it's certainly in our practice and in our approach, and I think in best practice anywhere, is not necessarily the first port of call. It's actually looking at the issues, looking at what is possibly the causes, excluding mesh, because there can be other causes as well. And we've had several patients who've been referred to us with what were thought to be mesh complications, and they were actually totally unrelated. We've, you know, operated on patients where it wasn't the mesh at all. There was previous procedures that had caused problems, and you know the mesh wasn't the issue at all. So it's a huge area. It is not simple and straightforward. These are complicated procedures. They're complicated solutions. As I say, we aim to treat women as holistically as possible and look at every aspect of their care, their physical care, their sexual care, their pelvic floor care, their mental health. And that's what we're working hard to develop these services and to make them as good as we possibly can, and to keep women as safe as we possibly can. That's first and foremost in our minds. And that's a big concern, because there is a narrative out there that
Dr. Murphy can answer clinical questions.
Let the witness finish, please. Dr. O'Sullivan, really appreciate you giving your time this morning, and thank you for eating into your on-call time as well. Really appreciate you taking part. So I'm going to start again from who is Bernard? Is it you that from the Fine Gael perspective, or is it?
I was interrupted in mid-course with something
You can ask it now to the rest of the panel, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I just need to record my objection to being interrupted in mid-course. I never interrupt anybody, making a rule never to interrupt anybody, never to cut in on somebody else's questioning, and I have observed that. But if it becomes the norm, that is going to become the norm, well, then I will do so in kind. So I just want to register my protest. So whom now, which area can I ask questions of now?
Well, there's a panel here.
And for how long?
The HSE panel is here.
Right, the HSE, can I ask the question you were suggesting should go to the HSE in relation to the degree to which the HSE has responded to the concerns, the pain and suffering, and the huge isolation and caused to the women who have been the victims? And is the HSE satisfied that it has responded sufficiently, with sufficient urgency, and that the issue remains at a high level of alert within the organisation? First question, Chairman.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, so in terms of the response from the HSE, it was obviously focused around the CMO report and the recommendations contained within that. You'll see within the opening statement that the vast majority of those recommendations have been put in place. And our main focus has been that operational response and putting in place the 2 national units and having communication channels out to women who have suffered pain and suffering around how they can contact our services and engage with them. So that's been our main focus.
Has the HSE compiled a list and a priority list of the patients who have an urgent need of consultation, and has that consultation taken place?
I might ask Dr. Murphy to come in on that.
So there were 190 patients who made contact with the HSE. There was a designated emails, there was information put up on the HSE website. So all of those contacts were responded to. And then it devolves to the individual sites regarding appointments. And as we've heard, there's no waiting list in Cork. There's a number of women waiting in Dublin, but contacts have been made with anybody who have made contact. as you can see, there's a slight discrepancy in numbers as to what we heard earlier, but we obviously are dealing with people who have made contact with the HSE. There have been 2 mesh administrators, one in Dublin and one in Cork, who has contact and oversight on any of the clinical activity going on. There's proformas have been set up to collect data going forward. Guidelines have been set up, so there's been an awful lot of work done on the ground to address the issues that we acknowledge were, not dealt with well in the past, for sure.
What about the women who went overseas for treatment, which isn't highly regarded, or isn't regarded to the extent that it should be here? What about them? Was any advice available to them as to where they could go to most conveniently receive treatment as a matter of urgency?
So, I mean, I can't comment on individual cases, but nobody would ever be blocked from going abroad if they chose to go. I mean, if they preferred to go to a different centre. However, the HSE can only administer the treatment abroad scheme, so we cannot do so retrospectively, if you like. But it has always been the case in medicine that sometimes people will decide they wish to access treatment in London or elsewhere that they've heard is good, and that goes for fertility, goes for various other aspects of medicine, and nobody would stand in somebody's way in that, nor in fact would there be any barrier to anybody coming back from aftercare if that was the case. But I can't comment on individual cases myself in that matter.
Should there not be a system that would advise women as to the better service available and the options available in those circumstances, A or B, whatever?
Well, the NHS have designated mesh centres also. There's between 7 and 8 of them that are freely available on their website, where you can see where there are mesh centres with urogynecologists and urologists working out of them. So they've done a similar system to what we have in Ireland. Obviously, a larger population affected, but that information is publicly available.
Anyway, in conclusion, Chairman, could I, from the information made available to us already, and having listened to the women who were so affected, would it not be fair to conclude that a better organised system in terms of dealing with the situation in the first place, in referring the women to whatever, not just saying, well, look, you can go over whatever service you require, that would appear to be the case, but actually referring them to a reliable, known and reliable service, and for removal or post-treatment in the same fashion.
Thanks, Bernard. Again, we can discuss that in private session. Right, I'm going to move on to David Cullinan.
We should have an answer to it in public session, Chairman.
David Cullinan.
Thank you, Look, Mr. Kidd, we had a number of women and 2 different groups in earlier on, and they raised a lot of issues in relation to medical card access, accountability issues, supports in terms of attending the clinics in Cork and Dublin, aftercare and support issues, the use of the translabia scanners, the extent in which they are available, and also the issues around access for treatment abroad, and many other issues as well. So it strikes me that there is a poor lack of engagement between those women and those campaign groups or advocate groups in the HSE. So I don't know if there is a point of contact or somebody in the HSE who engages with these women, but it strikes me it's quite poor. And if we have women coming before this committee who are survivors telling us that their experience is not a good one, that's a problem for the HSE. So I would suggest the first thing the HSE needs to do, notwithstanding your opening statement in relation to the implementation of the CMO's report and supports and services that you say are available, women obviously have a different view, and they have their view and they need to be listened to. So I would suggest that the HSE needs to examine that in the first instance. But I want to put questions in relation to the different treatment options and the clinical side of it. So maybe Dr. Murphy, if I just come to you. So I understand. Of course, I get it that a clinician has to make a clinical judgment as to what treatment they feel is best. So whether that's a partial or a full removal, obviously a surgeon or a specialist will have to decide from their perspective what's best, what's safe and so on. But then the women obviously have a choice and they have their own view. And it seems to me that either it's the case that there is a bias within the system towards partial removal, on the one hand, which might be based on the fact that clinicians see it as the best option, or that there's a lack of skills and expertise in actually performing full removals in this state. So which is it? Is there a lack of expertise in that area in terms of being able to perform full removals? And is that one of the reasons why there seems to be, I won't say a push, but certainly a view from clinicians that a partial removal is best?
So when describing options for complications of procedures, you have to give all the options, including conservative, interventional, etc. So the types of procedure that can be done after a complication would be covering of the mesh, division of the mesh, partial excision, full excision, complete removal. So they're all options if you read any of the papers. With regard to pain, there's good evidence saying if there's no mesh abnormality found, as in the mesh isn't extruding, it's not in the wrong place, then in fact removal of the mesh can even have persistent of pain in up to 42% of people. So it can depend on the presenting complaint and what what's the best option. So I wouldn't say it's the fact that the expertise isn't there, but it's along the lines of that we know that anywhere between 15 and 20% of people can have further complications after removal of mesh. And obviously there's a duty of care. There's a duty of care in the first instance when one is doing a primary procedure in medicine to offer all the options and to counsel appropriately. There's also a duty of care to not make a situation worse or to offer...
I get that. Just my time is really tight.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry because I have a minute and a half left. I just want to come back on that point. Because if a woman believes that a full removal is best for them, then it seems one of the few options, or maybe the only option they have, is to travel abroad and get it. And the HSE is saying, well, we fully support that and we'll support them through the reimbursement scheme or the treatment abroad scheme. But here's what one of the women said today in their opening statement, Ms. Arcade, and I'll address this to you as well, Ms. Murphy, that the HSE healthcare patients treatment abroad scheme is illusory. It says the system is stacked against them. It says that, in their view, patients who reject the HSE surgical preferences will only receive lip service when they ask the HSE consultants to provide the necessary documentation to support their application for the treatment abroad scheme. And they say that it's a like it or lump it, partial removal or nothing approach. And I'll just read the last paragraph of it, which I think is important. It says the HSE's official position that there is not just one but many surgeons who perform this operation locally means that the treatment abroad scheme pathway is a fool's errand. The gateway door never really opened. The HSE conducts an automated appeal. Rejection follows. The door is bolted from the inside. So it doesn't suggest to me that that is an option for many women, and they feel that it's very restrictive and they don't get supported if they want to get treatment abroad.
If I can just comment on, the fact that it's not available, it certainly is available, and there are people with the skills to do total mesh removal here. Now, with regard to the access to the treatment abroad scheme, I may ask Catherine to describe access to the treatment abroad scheme and experience so far.
Hi, Deputy Cullinan. So the treatment abroad scheme is governed by legislation, rules and criteria that are set down by Europe. Under the criteria, the patient needs a referral letter and a fully completed application form completed in conjunction with the referring consultant. We recognised that women were experiencing difficulty, and we developed a protocol so that they would get automatic approval. So what that protocol allows for is that in a situation where a case is complex and outside the competencies of the specialist service in Dublin or Cork, that the patient is referred either from Dublin to Cork or from Cork to Dublin for a second opinion in the first instance. And once the patient has those two examinations and they have the referral, then they're automatically approved by the Treatment Abroad scheme.
Well, that's not the women's experience, but I think we'll have to come back on that issue because it's not what we've been told by two different sets of groups that represent hundreds of women. It's not their experience of that scheme. It clearly isn't working for many of them, and it seems that if a consultant doesn't sign off on it, then the person can't avail of it. And while the HSE says it's available, what they're telling us is in reality it isn't. It's an illusion because there's problems with
You're
sign-offs.
absolutely right. If the consultant doesn't sign off on it, they need that referral in order to get through, yes.
And just on the issue of, you know, if a person needs more than one operation, you know, they need a follow-up in relation to reconstruction, and, you know, again, which was one of the points that was made this morning. They were saying that, you know, that wasn't covered under the scheme.
Okay, that's, again, not completely accurate. And each application is an individual application. So if you apply for surgery, then it's either approved or declined, one or the other. So you can apply for further surgery if that's deemed necessary. But if you were applying for follow-up care, to have your care transferred to another jurisdiction, that wouldn't happen. You'd have to have very good reason why follow-up care could not be provided in Ireland. I mean, if the follow-up care being surgery couldn't be provided in Ireland, yes, of course, you would be approved, but you must have a new application. In the initial application, you could specify two surgeries, 3 surgeries, whatever, but that would require to be included in the first application. We can only approve what's applied for. We can't approve what we don't know. So if there's something that is required later on that wasn't known at the first application, you just reapply.
And would it not be the case that, you know, once there's removal, then this necessitates construction after that? Well,
so normally when a patient goes abroad for surgery, regardless of whether it's paediatric heart transplant or mesh removal or whatever the surgery is, at discharge, the treating consultant abroad gives an up-to-date medical report and a care plan to the referring consultant in Ireland, and the referring consultant in Ireland implements the care plan.
Okay, great. Roshan?
Thanks very much. Who's the senior person responsible for service provision and policy in relation to this particular issue?
So in terms of operational implementation of the recommendations of the report and oversight of the service, it falls to acute operations in the HSE.
But who sets the policy?
So policy would obviously is a departmental issue. It's outside.
But from a clinical perspective, who is it?
From a clinical perspective, again, we would have worked closely with the National Women and Infants Health Programme to put in place the response from the recommendations.
So that would be Dr. Murphy, is that right?
Well, Dr. Murphy is currently the clinical lead there, but ultimately clinical responsibility falls into
who is leading clinically in relation to vaginal mesh issues?
So locally within the 2 national mesh complication centres, there's lead clinicians in place, but I might ask Cliona to come in on that.
So, so with regard to development of things like the national clinical guidelines, that would be under the remit of the National Women's and Infants Programme, which I'm clinical director since April. With regard to engagement with the clinical leads, that would be in our remit. There's been an awful lot of work done with regard setting up the mesh administrators with engagement with those 2 sites.
Okay, so there's a group of women here who have clearly been harmed and whose lives have been very negatively impacted by the treatment they received within the Irish Health Service. And they need to be able to engage with somebody at a senior level within the HSE. There hasn't been that engagement. And I'm asking you, I think, Dr. Murphy, you're the most obvious person to meet with them, and I'm asking you, will you undertake to meet with these 2 groups of women to address some of the issues they've raised?
I have no problem with engaging in patients in any capacity, for sure. And patient engagement was, you know, part of the original steering group that kicked off this process.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that's very important, that you'd meet with each of the 2 groups. And that could happen soon. Can you tell us how many women were fitted with vaginal mesh in Ireland in the
So-
last 20 years?
We can't give you those numbers, and in fact it's been difficult in many jurisdictions to give you those numbers. The reason is that the coding for example, stress and conscience procedures wouldn't specifically have said mesh. And the same for prolapse operation. The prolapse operation would be described but wouldn't necessarily include mesh. So added to that would be the fact that for many years we had paper-based services here. This is not necessarily unique to Ireland. You know, we heard
but
earlier.
Presumably the mesh itself would be regarded as a medical appliance.
Yes, but there are a number.
We should know how many of those have been used.
So there are a number of different companies, for example, who would have supplied those. So potentially each of the companies would know. But again, it's hard to be absolutely accurate in those figures, and that's to be perfectly honest.
Surely that data would have been identified for the CMO's report.
It's still very difficult to do retrospectively. What we're able to do is prospectively tell people going forward exactly how many will have been.
The retrospective figures are the relevant ones here.
Yeah, but we don't have full figures of
Can
that.
you access those?
It's going to be extremely difficult unless you do a hand trawl of.
Why can't that be done? I mean, the numbers aren't massive.
The numbers of affected women aren't large, but the estimate would be potentially about 10,000 of meshes, because we do know that the complication rate is between 1 and 3%. For example, you know, in the UK, when they reviewed, there were 95,000 women.
Okay, so you're saying 1 and 3% the complication
rate or removal rate, complication requiring removal rate.
Okay,
Yeah.
complication rate, what's that?
That depends on which paper you read. It can be up to 10-12%.
Well, international best
10-12%, yeah, something like that.
Sorry, what do you
10 or 12%, yeah.
10 or 12%, okay. Right, so how many people with complications have come to the attention of the HSE?
So with regard to numbers contacting us specifically, that would be 190. However, there may be people with more, I suppose, not as significant side effects would have been treated at your gynecology clinics and have their symptoms resolved or treated. So, you know, we're aware that those who contacted us as mesh injured patients would be a small subset of those maybe with symptoms.
Okay.
And there's an acknowledgement in the CMO's report that there was under-reporting certainly of that. Yeah.
Okay, how many people would have had partial removal?
It's hard to know because some of that partial removal would have even been done prior to the CMO's report, and partial removal, for example, if it's a mesh erosion, is not that difficult to do, and was often done in a timely fashion, and those women, would have.
This whole thing displays an extraordinary dearth of data. I mean, these are procedures which are carrying out on people in this country in the HSE, and you can't tell us the numbers. And there was an expert report done on it in 2018. I mean, this is just extraordinary that you can't produce those figures for us.
As you know, we're in the process of developing electronic health records. The health records in this country have been behind for a number of years, and matters are being addressed.
But there must be manual records of the number of procedures that took place, and presumably that didn't happen in every hospital.
There are 19 units that have gynecology units, and more in the private sector as well. A lot of them would have been in the private sector as well. So it's spread.
So was there an
private.
attempt made to request those 19 units to produce figures?
Yeah, there was a top-level assessment, I think Lena referred to earlier, which was the 10k amount, which you referred to. On the registered medical device issue, that's something we've engaged with HIPRA since the recommendations, and that's something now going forward. That
Surely there's a record of the number of those devices that were used.
It wouldn't have been a registered medical device prior to this, it's only post. So that is the issue, but 10k is that top-level assessment.
Do you have a figure on the number of people who had a full removal, if any?
So we estimate that there were 7. There's been 7 done in Cork. and some partials have been done in Dublin.
No full removals in Dublin?
I'm not entirely sure of the Dublin figure, yeah.
Can you get that for us, please?
Sure.
Okay. So how many people applied for the treatment abroad scheme?
I might get Catherine to respond to
Since
that.
2018, 7 people applied.
7 people. And how many of those were approved for treatment?
One person was approved. I'll give you exactly. So one person was approved in 2018, one person was approved in 2021, 2022-ish, and there's another application in the process of being approved. We're waiting on the MDT from the second specialist unit, and once that's in, that patient will be approved.
So what are those criteria that enable 2 people to access that scheme when others were refused?
Okay, so the criteria for the scheme are you must apply.
I know, but what were the criteria that were met by those 2 people who got approval?
So in 2018, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I don't have access to the patient's applications if they're approved. I only see them if they come to appeal. But in the second one, she was approved because she'd been seen by both the Cork and the Dublin clinical services, and they both recommended the treatment.
Okay, and is that a requirement that you have to go to 2 clinics?
Yes, so you must have been seen in one of the specialist clinics and a second opinion sought and received from the second one. So you must be able to demonstrate that you've exhausted all the services and a second opinion in Ireland, and then you're automatically approved.
Okay, we heard earlier about the distressing experience of going through the hoops in order to qualify. Okay, for treatment abroad. So can you just outline to us exactly what is the procedure if a woman has serious difficulties with the mesh and she wants to go abroad?
Okay, so an application to the treatment abroad scheme comes in 2 parts. Part A is completed by the patient, it's just general information.
Yeah.
Part B is completed by the treating consultant, the referring consultant. The referring consultant must recommend the treatment and provide a copy of the referral letter. Okay, so in the case of mesh, then they must have been seen in either the Dublin or the Cork, and then have a second opinion from the other service. They must be a public patient. They must apply and receive prior authorisation before they travel. And they must be attending a service in the EU, EEA, UK or Switzerland as a public patient.
Okay, so in your experience, sorry, just my final question, the people who didn't qualify for this scheme, what was the reason for that in the main?
Okay, and I'm conscious the numbers are small, okay? So accessing healthcare outside the EU, EEA is a disqualifying criteria. Accessing healthcare in the private sector in any country is a disqualifying criteria. Accessing healthcare without receiving prior authorisation is a disqualifying criteria. On that last one, we will use some discretion, but only where all the other criteria are filled.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
Gino, you're next.
Thanks, Ciara, and good morning to all our guests. I want to just focus most of my questions in relation to the CMO's report in 2018.
12, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go.
Okay. So my questions are on the CMO report in 4 years ago in relation to its 19 recommendations. So you said 11 have been completed. Could you name a number of them recommendations that have been completed in that category?
I might ask Cliona to come in. So there are a number of recommendations. I might start in terms of the completed, working in conjunction with other stakeholders, develop comprehensive evidence-based information resources about mesh devices and the services in place. So that's one of the ones. I don't know whether you want me to read out, but I can provide a report to the committee on each one because they're quite lengthy in terms of the detail of the regs.
Gino, can you accept that? We'll get that in the full report.
Yeah. And the 5 outgoing, could you kind of elaborate on, say, a number of them in relation to the ongoing recommendations?
Yeah, so there, and I might just for ease of reference, there are 4 in particular which are ongoing, and they relate to mesh professional training requirements and mesh surgical unit facilities. So for ease of reference, and I won't go through them all again because they're quite lengthy, the recommendations 8 to 11, and mainly they've been comprehended by recommendation 12, which is around national clinical guidance, but they do refer to, I suppose, when the pause is lifted. So they only come into being when the pause is lifted, so they require that pause to be lifted. So that's 4 of the recommendations. The other one that's ongoing is recommendation 1, which is around, it relates to, it's under the heading of patient information and consent, and I suppose that's in draft, but again it needs to be updated in line with new research and best practice when the system on notice that is on notice that the pause is to be lifted. So again it relates to that, the lifting of the pause.
And the 3 that are no longer deemed clinically appropriate, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I might get Cleena to come in on that if that's okay.
So that relates to mesh for prolapse surgery, and it's now not going to be a recommendation that mesh, would be used in prolapse surgery, and the clinicians, would advise that going forward. So in that case, it makes them moot in that case. So we do have guidance going forward, so to deal with that.
Okay. And just my final question is in relation to the overall programme itself. And obviously 4 years ago it was paused. Do you envisage that the programme could recommence under, the recommendations fulfilled, the recommendations carried out, and with the consent of obviously medical professionals and obviously the women that have kind of suffered terribly in relation to this, but is it envisaged that the programme could recommence in the future?
I might come in first and I'll bring Cleena in secondly. One of the issues for us, and we've heard through the testimony from the women affected by a number of the members here, is the significant learning, there's no doubt, from the response to the recommendations that we've put in place across a number of headings, and that's recognised, and we need to hear that, and I've heard that from a number of the members, as I say, and the women affected, so that's something we need to take on board. I suppose it has been always our intention after setup of the service and that operational response that we'd have a national oversight group in place to have a look at the service in terms of what we've put in place and what learnings we can take from that, and some of the learnings from today obviously as well, and our engagement with the groups. But on the specific question again around lifting the pause, that oversight group, the intention around that was to look at whether that would be appropriate, but I might get Cleena to come in on the mechanics of that. That's okay.
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be our role to lift the pause in that the CMO, caused the pause in the first place for good reasons. But should the pause be lifted, then obviously it would be a different landscape that you'd be talking about. So you'd be talking about tighter guidelines, designated people who would be approved to insert mesh under, strict controls. You'd be talking about a database of those mesh. But we are, as a clinician group, aware there are a large number of people, suffering from stress urinary incontinence symptoms for whom conservative measures have failed, and that mesh for stress urinary incontinence is recommended by a number of professional groups as an appropriate management for stress urinary incontinence. So there is that other competing interest of large numbers of women also in clinics, suffering from incontinence. But the landscape would be different, the controls would be different, and the oversight and data collection would be different.
So yeah, okay. So obviously, what I'm taking from that the programme could be recommenced in the future. And just for my final question, in relation to this procedure done elsewhere outside this jurisdiction, how prevalent is this procedure done in, say, in Britain or mainland Europe?
So there's been different approaches in different countries. So, for example, in Germany, I don't believe there was a pause. There is a pause, and mesh itself was not taken off the market. in any place. In the Netherlands, the response was along the lines of clinical governance, again tightening regulations and guidelines and that. And in New Zealand and Australia, there were slightly tighter controls as well in that area. So different approaches taken in different countries, but it is fair to say, mesh is being used in many other countries, yes.
Okay. Dr. Murphy, has in your experience, has the procedure ever been, has it been banned in any country around the world, whether, where a government or a health authority has said that
it has been paused as opposed to being banned, so so yeah, that and from the HPRA would say there was no report of a particular device, for example, being taken off the market or unsuitable to use in that way.
Yeah, and does it cause you concern that different countries have paused the program itself? Because obviously there's obviously concerns not only in this country but also elsewhere that a medical procedure could be actually detrimental to somebody's health.
I think it's in retrospect what possibly the problem is not so much the medical device in itself, but how widespread it's used and what indications and the counselling and the other options that were given to people, as opposed to a particular device being unsafe in itself. I think that would be fair to say, and the responses in the different countries would seem to indicate that the safety measures put in place were along the tightening the controls and the indications for that, as opposed to being more indiscriminate.
And do you see the programme recommencing in the future in Ireland? I know it's difficult to say, but
as I say, it's not for NWEP or the HSE to lift a pause. So we will await.
Who would make that decision?
Well, the CMO. Essentially, it was the CMO. So, I mean, the CMO recommendations. We've been working to complete the CMO recommendations. So that will be the first step.
Thanks.
Can I just deal with the issue about numbers? I'm just a little concerned when you were saying, there's anything up to 10,000 people, women that may have had mesh used and that procedure followed, and yet we've only just slightly over 100 people have attended specialist clinics. And, we've heard earlier this morning that there is concern with a large number of women who've gone through the procedure and feel that they haven't received the required follow-up care. And do you not think that there is obviously something missing? You referred yourself to 190 people making initial contact. You're saying there's various figures, about 10% have adverse outcomes as a result of the procedure. So if 10% of 10,000 is 1,000 people, yet only 100 people have attended the clinics.
Almost 200 make contact, but what I think you can infer is that a number of other people would have been seen at general gynecology clinics, in the last number of years. So the complications people can have after mesh can vary from, more minor to more serious. So I would expect that those who made contact were actually those at the most serious end of the scale. So, for example, somebody might have voiding dysfunction or difficulty in passing urine after a tape was put in, and that might occur in the first 2 or 3 weeks after surgery. That would be addressed by the clinician, and the woman may not have any complications going forward. We wouldn't have captured those types of instances. So I suppose there are so many different gynecology clinics where women would have been seen and potentially had any issues addressed.
Okay,
yeah.
And just in relation to where, say, people are looking to get treatment abroad because they're not happy with the service here in Ireland, do you accept that there may be a scenario where people have been received and have been reviewed in Cork and in Dublin and are not happy with the outcome, that there's a need for a better approach on this in that people feel that they're then going off and trying to get assistance from elsewhere without any support from the health service here?
I would say I don't think it's any clinician wishes to put barriers, in front of women. Like, I've dealt with women or patients in different spheres where we've engaged with the treatment abroad scheme in other conditions. So that has been part and parcel of the health service, and people have a professional obligation to engage. The treatment abroad scheme is not just for this area; it's for other areas, and I don't see that clinicians...
For instance, I came across a scenario, nothing to do with gynecology or obstetrics, where a consultant here refused point blank to allow the person get treatment in a particular area. And the person went, the consultant was requiring him to go through an operation where in fact he could get treatment abroad where he didn't require an operation. And there was a standoff between the patient and the consultant. The patient did go abroad, got the treatment, and then there was a scenario where I was involved in a legal capacity in trying to recover the money from the insurance company, which we eventually recovered through a legal process. So what I'm saying to you is that there is a difference of opinion sometimes with consultants, and that maybe the best outcome for the patient is to get that care abroad, because that's the belief they have.
Well, I mean, the reason that there's two centres is so there is recourse to more than one consultant, and that's fair to say. So as much as possible, we would feel that people should be able to, and doing our best to provide care in the country, conscious of, travelling abroad is not an easy option for anybody. So I think none of this is going to hinge on one consultant or one consultant's opinion.
But do you not accept that there are times that there are people who believe, no matter what advice they provide here in Ireland, because of what has happened to them, there's a lack of trust with the system here. And sometimes it might be a better option to allow that person exercise and I'm not talking about going, obviously I'm talking about staying within the European Union, because the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive provides for that. And so they have to stay within a country within the European Union. But do you not accept that there might be a process put in place to accommodate that person who believes that they've lost the trust in the system here?
I just might like Catherine to come in on that.
Deputy Clerk, you're absolutely correct, and we come across that situation, I won't say often, but certainly regularly, and that is probably the biggest advantage to the Cross-Border Directive, because the patient doesn't require a consultant to sign off on a referral like the treatment abroad scheme does. So, and you're correct in what you say about the Cross-Border Directive. It refers to the EU and DEA. So if a patient has a GP referral, they can use that referral to access healthcare under the Cross-Border Directive. They don't require prior authorisation or prior notification. They can simply, with their properly executed GP referral, opt to access healthcare in another country in the EU or EEA.
And just on that, you're talking about access within the EU. Does that now exclude access to treatment in the UK now because of the UK?
It excludes access to the UK and Switzerland, because neither of those countries have transposed that.
Whereas previously they would have been able to go to the UK.
But the Northern Ireland Planned Healthcare Scheme was put in place by the Department of Health, and that's been continuing on an administrative basis, and you can access healthcare in Northern Ireland in the very same way as the Cross-Border Directive in the private sector.
Okay, but you're saying so that where someone has lost total trust in the system here, and this is not a criticism of the medical professionals, and it happens in in all areas, whether it is on the legal world, in the medical world, it happens in every sphere of Irish life. But you're saying so that if a GP is satisfied that this person does require an opinion and maybe treatment, that there is nothing preventing a GP from giving a referral letter for that person to travel. Now, the disadvantage, of course, is the treatment abroad scheme is that the person has to pay in advance and then try and recoup that afterwards.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So that is the big disadvantage of the
So it's not open.
Directive.
It's not a scheme that's open to everyone.
cross-border directive is open to everybody.
Well,
Yeah.
I know, but because of the cost issue, it's not open.
Look, financial can be a barrier, but I can tell you we're doing all we can. I'm actually meeting with the Irish League of Credit Unions this afternoon to try and put in place a scheme to allow patients to have access to funding, because it is the patients who don't have private health insurance that are using the cross-border directive. So it's very important that they have access to financing.
Yeah. Sorry, could I come back to Dr. Murphy, and that's in relation to the number of consultants who would have been providing this care is quite small in real terms. My understanding is that it may be as low as under 20. Therefore, the collection of data, therefore, should be, I know it's not easy and you have to go through records, and because we have this crazy system here where we don't have an up-to-date data collection service in real terms. Our medical records are still paper files. But is it still not possible to collect that data because of the small number of consultants who are providing this type of care?
Potentially, individual consultants can, and some of them have gone through, obviously, their own files and that. And some of the difficulty can be, obviously, people have retired, and also it's spread not just in, maternity units with gynecology, but also some standalone gynecology units within HSE hospitals and then private centres. So there's, it does cover in a large number of units, and some of them have better data collecting systems than others, all right, for sure. But as an aim, I accept that it would be great to get more granular data, for sure, to know, exactly what the number is, and potentially have a better denominator as to, we would know how many people actually had good outcomes as well as poor outcomes.
And can I just ask, in relation to the pausing of a particular medical procedure, this was paused in 2018. If a medical procedure is identified at some stage, no matter what area of medicine, how long does it take us really to take action to make sure that we act on what is international best practice about pausing a particular type of treatment? Is there a mechanism in place for doing that?
Yeah, I might come in on that, if that's okay, Deputy Burke, as well, and I'll bring Clean in afterwards. That can vary and depend on the type of notification we receive. So it could be through HIPAA around the use of a particular implant or product that we use in terms of an intervention with a patient. So that can be immediate, where they notify a pause to us and say, please don't use this product. Or it can vary into emerging evidence depending on the use of that product and the type of complications that result, and that can happen over time, so that can have an impact. So it depends, but I might bring Clean in on.
Yeah, and I think at the CMO's report it wasn't envisaged as being as long as it has been, and obviously lots of things have happened in the health service in the last 2 years, that have impacted on that. So there may well be changes in other jurisdictions that also impact on us, but it wouldn't normally have been as long as that, if you like, if that's the answer to your question.
But I mean, what are the indicators that need to be in place before we decide to pause a medical procedure? Is it at European level? Is it at UK level? Is it at level in the US?
Well, often it is, in Ireland, it's often we would respond to, for example, signals in the UK. We had examples of that in vaccination, where there was a pause in a particular vaccine until more evidence was available, and then the pause was lifted. So we often do follow trends in the UK, our nearest neighbour, and there would be obviously close communication between clinicians and CMOs in both Ireland, Scotland. So there's close communication in those matters.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. And again, just from my own perspective, I suppose we got this morning, a sense of the scale of the challenge, and yet, if you look at the figures in relation to those who go to Cork and Dublin, it doesn't seem to reflect that scale. And I just, and the challenge that's there, and there's clearly women out there who are suffering, and you were saying that in your opening statement that there was advertisement and so on, and 70 women came forward and so on. But I'm surprised that that more and more women are not coming forward, and I don't know if that's down to a lack of confidence in the service. And and I'm listening to what you're saying here this morning. I welcome the fact that you're engaging with the likes of the credit union, that you're looking at. You said you'd follow the evidence that was given this morning, and I was saying to some of the women this morning about the Cumberledge report and the review, and I was saying that if I was looking at this whole area, I would go through that and see if there's anything we can adopt in relation to an Irish perspective, and a lot of them are common sense approaches in relation to it, and I think it certainly would be a way forward. The CMO's recommendation, is there a particular timescale that you have to be, you look into a timescale when they will be all...
Yeah, I think the next step for us, Chair, as I gave the update earlier in terms of what we've implemented to date, the next step for us is that oversight group, and in terms of addressing the remainder of those recommendations, our intention is to put that in place. In fact, we've identified a chair for that. We will want patient representation as part of that process as well, and that's important following the evidence this morning. So there's no doubt as part of that, we will feed in hopefully to improvements we can make and around that communications piece as well. In terms of the time frame, I think we'd be happy to bring back a report to the committee probably in the third quarter, in the late autumn, if that's okay. That's reasonable. If that's reasonable, I think just in terms of Deputy Burks, I know he's gone now, and his comment around the data, I think it's important to distinguish between two things. Obviously, we've acknowledged the difficulties in the retrospective piece. What we've put in place is a programme of work to, I suppose, do the prospective piece more effectively. So we will have clear data, and we can include that in the report we bring back to the committee, if that's reasonable.
And just again, go back to the clinics, that again, women were saying about the difficulty in transport and getting to, and like it's the Cork clinic would be for all of Munster. So we also need to look at other issues, how people get there, the length of time people are in the clinic, because again, I'm conscious that they may not be able to sit down for a long time period. They may, there's other services. It's a bigger picture. It's not just going, sitting there and seeing the clinician. That there's other supports that could be done in relation, to make it more easier access for those women who want to come forward as well. And again, I suppose that's clearly something that could be looked at. The communications strategy that you have, again, I think that's really useful, and maybe that's something to look at again. We did give a commitment that we would return to this issue, and we're conscious that there's men that are, have had problems as well, and we'll look at sort of other areas, not just vaginal mesh implants, but we'll look at others. Just on the mesh themselves, the governance structures of the mesh or the devices, is there changes going to come about in relation to that? Is there, what is the structure now that, moving forward, again, coming on the CMO recommendations?
I just might bring in clean on that, but what I understand from what you're asking, Chair, is around their use, the governance around their use, but I'll bring clean.
I'm conscious that there is a pause, and, that was some of the questions that people asked. You were saying about Germany, they still went ahead in some other jurisdictions, but as I say, it may work for some, but, we're walking a delicate line.
I suppose to answer that, so in the future, the HPRA have kind of classified mesh differently, and there, has been more communication out to people as regards reporting instances. So there was an acknowledgement there was maybe under-reporting of complications in the past. We have this pro forma, which has been set up to, so any mesh that would be put in, and with complications is identified and it's clearly tagged. We also have, very detailed guidelines put up regarding diagnosis and management of mesh complications, as well as management of stress urinary incontinence going forward. So the clinical governance piece, there's been a lot of work put into it. In the future, should mesh be allowed again in the country, then it would, there'd be a strict number of people that would have the authorisation to use it in their lists, and that would, there'd be a clear line of governance in that area. So, and then there would be MDTs as well. That there would be a good decision making behind any of that insertion. So there's a number of things in place that I think it will improve the quality and safety of care given to women. And obviously, if I could just say again that we welcome any women who haven't made contact before to make contact with us. We want to do our best for women, and we can acknowledge people may be embarrassed to come forward, or maybe don't want to go to the same unit they were in again. That can be an issue, but the services are there. We want to provide service for people who feel that they have lost out or maybe didn't come forward in the past.
Okay, I'm getting the nod that we've gone over time, and I really appreciate you coming in. Yeah.
We're coming back to this subject again. Would it be unreasonable to ask the HSE to carry out whatever is requirements to reassure the women who we've all heard from, to reassure them, to restore their confidence in relation to the methodology, the manner and the treatment, and to ascertain as well that where pauses have taken place in other countries, they haven't been without some reason. And could you perhaps enlighten us at the next meeting as to what the reasons were for the pauses, so that if particular procedures or cause for concern, which is what the issue is, of course, that we know about it.
And the other one, if you could give us a written reply in relation to, you mentioned here again in your statement about the gynecologists from Britain that came over to teaching day, it seems strange just one day, or wherever in Cork or wherever. You might give us just a background of that as well. Again, appreciate you coming in. Appreciate the group that came in previously as well. I'd like to thank all witnesses today for their involvement in this comprehensive discussion with the committee today. The meeting now stands adjourned. Meet again in public session next Wednesday, 6th of July at 9:30 a.m. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.